Hi guys, and welcome to America History Tales. Tonight we step quietly into a small southern town during the 1870s, a place where the Civil War has technically ended, but the echoes of it still hang in the air like the smell of wood smoke drifting through a cool evening. You find yourself standing on a dusty road that stretches between sagging wooden fences and tired-looking houses. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rings, slowly its soft metal tone rolling over the fields, as if time itself has grown a little heavier here. You take a step forward, boots crunching softly over gravel and dry clay. The air is warm and faintly sweet with the scent of magnolia blossoms, though underneath that sweetness there is also the earthy smell of damp soil and livestock. It feels peaceful at first glance, quiet even. But if we are being honest, you probably will not survive this version of the South very comfortably. Life here is hard in ways that modern life rarely prepares you for. Long days of labour, uncertain politics, fragile livelihoods, and a constant sense that the ground beneath society is still shifting. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you are settling in, feel free to post your location and the local time where you are listening from. It is always fascinating to see where in the world these quiet history journeys reach. Now, dim the lights and imagine the town slowly coming into focus around you. The road beneath your feet leads toward a cluster of buildings gathered around a small square. Nothing here is grand. Most of the structures are wooden, their paint faded by years of sun and rain. Some buildings lean slightly as though they have grown tired of standing upright. A few still carry scars from the war. A missing shutter here, a patched roof there. A horse pulls a narrow wagon past you, the animal's hooves making dull thuds against the packed earth. The driver tips his hat in a quiet greeting. Politeness remains an important currency in the South, even when money itself is scarce. In the years following the war, towns like this one exist in a strange in-between state. According to widely accepted historical records, by the early 1870s, the southern states had been formally readmitted to the Union, and Reconstruction governments were attempting to rebuild political and social systems across the region. On paper, it sounded organised. In reality, daily life often felt uncertain and fragile. You pass a small general store where the wooden porch boards creak beneath the weight of a few men sitting on barrels. Their conversation drifts lazily through the warm air. Cotton prices, railroad rumours, politics. Politics comes up a lot these days. One man leans back in his chair, tilting his hat low over his eyes, as if shielding himself from more than just the sun. Another taps a pipe against his boot heel, releasing the faint smell of tobacco that mixes with the scent of pine sap from the nearby trees. Across the street, a group of children runs barefoot through the dust, laughing as they chase a hoop made from an old iron barrel ring. Their laughter feels surprisingly bright against the quiet tension that lingers among the adults. A small but important historical reality of this time is that many southern towns were still recovering economically from the devastation of the war. Farms had been destroyed, rail lines damaged, and entire local economies thrown into chaos. Rebuilding required time, labour, and a great deal of patience that not everyone possessed. As you continue walking, you notice the houses change slightly depending on which road you follow. Some are larger, though still worn down. Others are small cabins built quickly from rough timber. The variety reflects the shifting social order that Reconstruction has begun to reshape. Freedom has technically arrived for millions of formerly enslaved people. That fact alone has changed the rhythm of daily life in profound ways. You hear voices drifting from a nearby yard where a family is gathered around a wash basin. A woman scrubs clothing against a wooden board while two younger children carry buckets of water from a well. A man nearby repairs a broken fence rail hammer, striking wood with slow, steady taps. The smell of soap and damp cotton drifts through the air. It is an ordinary scene, and yet in the context of the 1870s, South ordinary life itself has become something new. Some historians continue to debate how fully freedom transformed daily experience during Reconstruction. Legal emancipation certainly ended slavery, yet economic dependency and social barriers often remained stubbornly in place. The reality on the ground varied widely from one town to the next. You pause near the edge of town where open fields begin to stretch toward the horizon. Cotton plants rustle gently in the breeze, their pale fibres catching the last light of the afternoon sun. The fields seem peaceful, but they demand endless work. Your fingers brush one of the cotton bolls. The fibres feel soft, but the husk around them is edged with tiny thorns that prick your skin if you are not careful. Farm labour here has never been gentle. A curious and somewhat lesser known tidbit from this era is that some newly freed families planted small personal items beneath the first crops they cultivated on their own plots of land. Coins, buttons, sometimes even fragments of old chains were buried in the soil as symbolic gestures. It was a quiet way of marking the land with memory and hope. Whether every story about these rituals is accurate remains uncertain, but the idea itself reveals how deeply people longed for new beginnings. The sun begins to sink lower now, turning the sky a warm shade of amber. Shadows stretch across the road like long fingers. Back in town, lanterns are being lit inside the windows of homes and shops. The soft yellow glow flickers through thin curtains, giving the streets a gentle warmth that almost hides the tension simmering beneath the surface of Reconstruction society. A dog barks somewhere down the road. A train whistle echoes faintly from far away. That whistle carries a promise of change. Railroads are slowly pushing deeper into the south again, reconnecting isolated towns to larger markets and cities. But that is a story waiting further down the road. For now, you simply stand at the edge of the fields, breathing in the humid evening air, listening to insects begin their steady chorus in the grass. The town behind you settles into the slow rhythm of night. And as you begin walking back toward the warm lantern light of the main street, you start to realize that living here in the Reconstruction South means learning to exist in a world that is rebuilding itself piece by fragile piece. Some people greet that future with hope. Others greet it with suspicion. Most simply greet it with exhaustion. Your quiet journey through this town is only just beginning. The evening air grows a little cooler as you wander farther from the centre of town, following a narrow road that curves gently between rows of aging oak trees. Their branches stretch overhead like a slow-moving ceiling of leaves, filtering the last amber light of sunset into soft patterns on the ground. Spanish moss sways lightly from the limbs, brushing the air with a faint whisper each time the breeze passes through. You keep walking until the houses begin to thin out. Soon the road leads toward land that once belonged to one of the grand plantations of the region. Even now, years after the war ended, the place still carries a strange presence. Not frightening exactly, but heavy with memory. The old main house stands at the end of a long gravel drive. Its white columns remain tall, though the paint has peeled away in long strips that reveal grey weathered wood beneath. Several windows are boarded up. One shutter hangs crooked, gently tapping against the frame whenever the wind picks up. Once this building would have been the centre of a vast agricultural empire. Dozens of enslaved workers, endless rows of cotton wagons coming and going at all hours. Wealth flowed through these doors. Now the yard feels quiet. Grass has begun reclaiming the garden paths. The decorative hedges have grown wild and uneven. A fountain sits dry in the centre of what used to be a carefully designed courtyard. When the breeze shifts, the faint smell of damp stone drifts through the air. You step closer, boots crunching softly on the gravel. Across the fields behind the house, a few figures move slowly among the crops. They are working the land, though not in the way the plantation once operated. The old system is gone, replaced by new arrangements that often prove just as complicated. A widely recognised historical fact is that after the Civil War, many large plantations were broken up or reorganised under the sharecropping system. Landowners who no longer had enslaved labour began offering small plots to tenant farmers. In return, those farmers paid a portion of their crops as rent. On paper, the arrangement seemed simple. In practice, it often trapped families in cycles of debt. You pause beside a crumbling stone wall and watch the workers moving through the cotton rows. Their movements are slow and steady, practiced through long hours of repetition. The plants rustle quietly whenever their hands brush the leaves. Some of these farmers are formerly enslaved people attempting to build independent lives. Others are poor white families who also lost everything during the war. Reconstruction has a strange way of mixing fortunes together. The evening sun slides lower, casting long shadows across the fields. From this distance, the workers appear almost like silhouettes against the pale cotton blossoms. Not far from the main house stands a row of small wooden cabins. They are simple structures built from rough planks, each with a narrow porch and a chimney made of stacked stone. Smoke curls lazily upward from a few of the chimneys, carrying the comforting smell of cooking beans and cornmeal. You wander toward the cabins, hearing the gentle sounds of life settling in for the night. A baby cries softly inside one home. Someone hums a tune while stirring a pot over a fire. A pair of children chase each other through the yard until an older woman calls them back with a patient but firm voice. These cabins represent the quiet centre of daily life for many families during Reconstruction. Though modest, they also represent something new: ownership of time, the ability to decide when to rest, when to gather with family, when to sing. Some historians continue to debate how much freedom sharecropping truly provided. While it allowed formerly enslaved people to live outside the direct authority of plantation owners, economic pressures often forced farmers to remain tied to the same land year after year. You lean lightly against a fence post, feeling the rough grain of the wood beneath your palm. Fireflies begin appearing across the field, tiny sparks of gold blinking slowly in the growing darkness. One of the workers finally approaches from the cotton rows. His shirt is damp with sweat from the long day, and he carries a small sack over his shoulder filled with freshly picked cotton. He nods politely as he passes. In towns and farms across the South, simple gestures like this have become part of a delicate social balance. Everyone is adjusting to a new order that is still being defined. A curious and slightly unusual story, sometimes mentioned in local folklore, involves small charms planted near cabin doorways during these years. Some families placed iron nails or bits of broken horseshoe beneath the threshold. The belief was that iron could protect the household from misfortune or wandering spirits. Whether the practice came from African traditions, European folk customs, or a mixture of both is something scholars occasionally discuss with interest. What matters more is the comfort such rituals provided in uncertain times. A breeze moves across the open land, carrying with it the soft scent of cotton plants and warm soil. Crickets begin their steady chorus in the grass, filling the quiet spaces between sounds. You notice that the plantation house behind you grows darker as the last sunlight fades. Its tall columns now appear almost grey in the twilight, like silent sentinels watching over a world that has changed beyond recognition. It is easy to imagine the voices that once echoed through its halls. Dinner parties, political discussions, business deals made over glasses of whiskey. Now those sounds have been replaced by the simpler rhythms of rural life. The scrape of a shovel, the creak of a wagon wheel, the low murmur of families sharing the evening meal. Reconstruction did not erase the past overnight. Instead, it layered new experiences over old landscapes, creating a complicated tapestry of memory and change. You hear laughter drifting from one of the cabins. Someone has begun telling a story, their voice rising and falling with dramatic pauses. A few listeners respond with quiet chuckles. Storytelling has always been a powerful tradition in the South. Long before radios or electric lights, evenings were often filled with spoken tales passed from one generation to the next. Tonight is no different. The sky above you deepens into shades of violet and deep blue. One bright star appears near the horizon, shining clearly through the warm southern night. You turn back toward the road that leads into town. Behind you, the old plantation rests in silence, its history woven into every field and fence line. Ahead, the lantern lights of the town flicker gently in the distance, promising more stories waiting to unfold. And as you begin walking again, the slow rhythm of Reconstruction life continues quietly around you. Piece by piece, field by field, family by family. The road carries you away from the quiet plantation fields and gradually back toward the scattered homes that sit along the edge of town. Night has settled fully now, wrapping the countryside in a warm darkness that feels thick with humidity. The crickets sing steadily in the grass, and somewhere nearby, a bullfrog releases a deep echoing croak from a pond you cannot quite see. Lantern light glows softly from the windows of small cabins, each one creating a golden square against the dark. You walk slowly past them, noticing how the sounds of evening life drift through thin wooden walls. A spoon tapping against a metal pot, low conversation, the gentle rhythm of someone rocking a chair on a porch. Many of these homes belong to families who only a few years ago lived under very different circumstances. Freedom has arrived in law, yet the process of building an independent life is unfolding step by cautious step. You follow a narrow footpath that leads toward a cluster of cabins set around a shared well. A few people have gathered there even at this late hour, taking advantage of the slightly cooler night air to finish chores that were postponed during the heat of the afternoon. A young man lowers a wooden bucket slowly into the well, the rope sliding across the pulley with a quiet rasp. When the bucket hits the water, the splash echoes faintly up the stone shaft. He pulls it back up, hand over hand, muscles tightening in his arms with the familiar effort. Nearby, an older woman pours water into a basin while humming softly to herself. The tune is slow and gentle, rising and falling in a pattern that feels almost like breathing. Music often finds its way into ordinary tasks here. A well-established historical reality is that during Reconstruction, many newly freed African American communities placed tremendous importance on building independent households and neighborhoods. Churches, schools, and shared spaces such as wells or gathering yards became central points where people could support one another and exchange information. You watch as a small group gathers near one of the porches. Their conversation is quiet but animated, the kind that carries both excitement and caution. Someone mentions a new opportunity to rent land farther south. Another speaks about a relative who has moved to a nearby town where wages are rumoured to be slightly higher. These discussions are common in the 1870s South. Families weigh options carefully, trying to find stability in a landscape where economic conditions shift constantly. You take a seat on the edge of a low fence, letting the rough wood press gently through the fabric of your clothing. The night air smells of damp earth and wood smoke from cooking fires that have only recently been extinguished. A small boy wanders into the yard holding a jar filled with fireflies. The tiny lights blink softly through the glass like floating stars. He lifts the jar proudly toward the adults gathered nearby. A few of them laugh quietly at his discovery. Moments like this remind you that even during uncertain times, childhood still finds ways to shine. Some historians continue to debate how quickly formerly enslaved families were able to establish stable communities after emancipation. In certain areas, land ownership and education opportunities appeared relatively quickly. In others, barriers remained frustratingly strong, slowing progress for decades. The reality, as with many parts of history, likely varies from place to place. Your attention shifts toward a pair of men sitting near the well, speaking in low voices. One of them unfolds a piece of paper that catches the lantern light. A letter. Letters carry enormous importance during Reconstruction. News travels slowly, and written words often serve as the only connection between scattered family members. You notice how carefully the man holds the page, smoothing its edges before reading aloud. The letter describes a town several counties away where work might be available, building railroad tracks. The listener's leaning closer as he reads. Railroads are beginning to reshape the region once again. Tracks damaged during the war are slowly being repaired and new lines are creeping across the countryside. These iron roads promise jobs, trade and connection to distant cities. But they also bring change, and change can make people nervous. A curious and slightly quirky detail sometimes mentioned in personal accounts from this era involves small personal tokens carried by travellers searching for work. Some men reportedly kept a single nail or railroad spike in their pocket as a symbol of determination, believing it might bring luck when seeking employment along the expanding rail lines. Whether this practice was widespread or simply a handful of memorable anecdotes is difficult to confirm. Still, the idea fits the hopeful spirit many people carried with them during these years. The lantern near the porch flickers as a breeze passes through the yard. Its flame dances briefly before settling back into a steady glow. Across the clearing, a woman steps outside her cabin holding a bundle of laundry. She hangs a few damp shirts on a line strung between two trees. The fabric sways gently, catching the faint breeze. You notice how the night seems full of small movements like this. A rocking chair creaks. A door closes softly. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle sounds, again, low and far away, across the dark fields. The sound causes several people to pause and listen. Even here, miles from the nearest station, the whistle carries a certain promise. Opportunity. Travel. Perhaps a different life. Scholars still discuss the extent to which rail expansion truly opened economic doors for freedmen during Reconstruction. While railroads created jobs and connected rural communities to larger markets, many of the higher paying positions remained limited to white workers. Progress, like the rebuilding towns themselves, moves forward slowly. The small group at the porch eventually begins to disperse. One by one, they return to their homes, lanterns disappearing behind doors that close with quiet thuds. The boy releases his fireflies at last, opening the jar and watching them drift upward into the night like scattered sparks. You rise from the fence and continue walking down the path toward town again. Behind you, the cluster of cabins grows quiet as families settle into sleep. The well stands silent beneath the stars, its rope swaying gently from the earlier work. Ahead, faint lantern lights still glow along the main street. Your journey through this rebuilding world continues step by step, each corner revealing another small glimpse of how life in the Reconstruction South slowly takes shape. The lantern lights of town grow brighter as you return along the dusty road, their soft glow spilling out across the ground like small islands of warmth in the thick southern night. The air still carries the heat of the day, though a faint breeze has begun drifting in from the river, bringing with it the cool smell of water and damp reeds. You follow the road past the general store again, but this time the building is mostly quiet. The men who were sitting on the porch earlier have gone home, leaving behind a row of empty barrels and a single rocking chair that sways slowly back and forth, nudged by the evening wind. A little farther down the street, however, you notice something unusual. Light spills from a large canvas tent set up beside a narrow wooden building. From inside comes the murmur of voices mixed with the scratch of chalk against a board. Curious, you step closer. The tent serves as a school. Inside, several rows of rough benches have been arranged facing a simple wooden table that functions as a teacher's desk. The students sitting there are not just children. Some are grown adults, their shoulders broad from years of labour in fields or workshops. Others are teenagers who appear slightly nervous but determined. Nearly everyone holds a small slate board or a worn book. Education has become one of the most powerful hopes of Reconstruction. Records from the era show that thousands of schools for formerly enslaved people were established across the South during the late 1860s and early 1870s. Many of them began in humble places like this one, under tents in abandoned buildings or inside small church halls. You pause quietly at the entrance of the tent so you do not interrupt. At the front of the room stands the teacher, a young woman with her sleeves rolled neatly to the elbows. She writes letters slowly across a chalkboard. Her voice is calm and patient as she repeats each letter aloud. The students respond together, some confidently, others hesitantly, as though testing sounds they have never fully used before. You notice the concentration in their faces, brows furrowed, lips moving quietly as they repeat the shapes of the letters. For many people here, learning to read is not simply an academic exercise. It is a gateway to independence, reading contracts, understanding laws, writing letters to distant family members. The scratching of chalk fills the tent again as the teacher draws a few simple words beneath the alphabet. She invites one of the older students to come forward. The man rises slowly from the bench, removing his hat before stepping toward the board. His hands are large and calloused, clearly used to tools rather than pencils. When he takes the chalk, it looks almost delicate between his fingers. He studies the word for a moment, then carefully he reads it aloud. The class responds with a quiet ripple of encouragement. Researchers who study Reconstruction often point out that literacy rates among formerly enslaved people rose dramatically during these years. The change did not happen overnight, but the determination to learn proved remarkably strong in communities across the region. You step slightly to the side as another late arrival enters the tent carrying a lantern. The warm light brightens the room, illuminating the simple faces of the students as they follow the lesson. One detail occasionally mentioned in personal diaries from teachers of this period is how eager many students were to practice writing their own names. Signing a name carried deep symbolic meaning after generations of being denied that basic form of identity. Some learners filled entire slates with repeated attempts at their signature until the letters finally began to look steady and proud. The lesson continues quietly for a while. Outside the tent, the night deepens. Crickets sing in steady rhythm, and the faint scent of pine drifts from the nearby trees. Eventually, the teacher closes the book and thanks the class for their hard work. A few students linger afterward, asking questions or practicing letters once more before leaving. You watch them step out into the warm darkness, each person carrying their slate board carefully as though it was something precious. In many ways it is. Not everyone in the South welcomes these schools with enthusiasm. Some towns support them strongly, while others react with suspicion or even hostility. The historical community remains divided about just how transformative these early schools proved in the long term. Some scholars emphasize their role in laying the foundation for future generations of black educators and leaders. Others note that funding shortages and political backlash often limited what the schools could accomplish during Reconstruction itself. Still standing here beside the quiet tent, it is difficult not to feel the sense of possibility in the air. You hear footsteps approaching along the road and turn to see a pair of children walking home with their mother. Each child carries a small book pressed tightly against their chest. They pass beneath the lantern light, whispering excitedly about the letters they learned tonight. One of them stops briefly to trace shapes in the dust with a stick. The letters look uneven, but the child grins proudly before hurrying after the others. You glance back at the school tent once more. The teacher has begun extinguishing lanterns inside, leaving only a soft glow from the final lamp near the entrance. Soon the tent will be dark, but tomorrow evening the lessons will begin again. You continue walking down the street, listening as the town settles further into nighttime quiet. Somewhere a porch swing creaks gently. A dog shifts in its sleep beneath a wagon. Behind you the small school disappears into shadow. Yet the sound of those newly learned letters seems to linger in the warm southern air, drifting softly across the town, like the promise of a future that is still being written. By the time you leave the quiet school tent behind, the night has grown deep and calm. Most of the lanterns in town are now dim or extinguished, leaving only a few scattered lights glowing along the street. The sky above stretches wide and clear, filled with more stars than you usually notice in modern cities. You follow the road as it slowly slopes away from town again, heading toward the fields that surround it on nearly every side. The earth here is dry and slightly cracked beneath your boots, still holding the heat of the day. In the distance, you hear the faint rustling of plants shifting in the night breeze. Cotton! Even after dark, the presence of cotton fields never quite disappears in the Reconstruction South. The plants stretch for acres, pale fibres catching the moonlight like scattered bits of cloud, resting close to the ground. You move along a narrow path between the rows brushing past the leaves. The plants whisper softly against your clothing as you pass. For many families in the 1870s, life revolves around fields like these. Surviving agricultural records from the period show that cotton remained the dominant crop across much of the southern economy during Reconstruction. Although slavery had ended, the region still relied heavily on the same land and the same crop that had shaped its economy before the war. What had changed was the system of labour. Earlier in the evening, you glimpse workers returning from the fields. Now you begin to understand just how much effort goes into producing the white fibres that fill those sacks. Picking cotton is slow, careful work. Each boll must be pulled gently from its thorny shell. The fibres are soft, but the surrounding husk is sharp enough to scratch skin repeatedly throughout the day. You imagine the long hours spent bending over these rows beneath the hot southern sun, hands moving again and again in the same small motion. Pull, drop into sack, step forward, repeat. The quiet rhythm continues for miles across the countryside. As you reach the far edge of the field, you see a small cabin with a lantern still glowing inside the window. The light flickers softly, suggesting someone is still awake. Curious, you wander a little closer. Through the open doorway, you glimpse a family gathered around a wooden table. A woman carefully mends a torn shirt, while a man examines a small notebook filled with numbers. A child rests his head on folded arms, clearly struggling to stay awake. The notebook likely holds the details of their sharecropping arrangement. Under the system used across much of the South during these years, farmers rented land from property owners and paid for supplies on credit through local merchants. Seeds, tools and food often had to be purchased before the harvest arrived. At the end of the season, the farmer's portion of the cotton crop would be used to settle the debt. In theory, this allowed families without land to farm independently. In practice, the numbers in those small notebooks could become painfully complicated. Many farmers discovered that after the merchant calculated the cost of supplies and interest, very little profit remained. Some even ended the year owing money despite months of hard labour. Economic historians have spent decades discussing whether sharecropping offered a genuine path toward independence or simply replaced one form of dependency with another. The answer often depends on the specific region and the honesty of the local merchants involved. Inside the cabin, the man closes the notebook and rubs his forehead wearily. The woman finishes stitching the shirt and sets the needle aside. She stretches her hands, slowly flexing fingers that must work constantly throughout the day. Outside, the cotton field continues rustling softly beneath the moonlight. A small but interesting custom, sometimes mentioned in oral histories from southern farming communities, involves lucky tokens carried into the fields. Some workers tied bits of coloured cloth to the straps of their picking sacks, believing the colour might help keep away bad fortune during the harvest. Whether these small traditions truly brought luck is impossible to measure, but they added a sense of personal meaning to the repetitive labour. You continue walking along the field path, noticing how the night sounds seem louder here away from town. Frogs croak from a nearby creek. Insects buzz steadily in the tall grass. A distant owl calls, once its low hoot echoing across the open land. The workday may be finished, but tomorrow the routine will begin again before sunrise. Many sharecroppers rise long before daylight to prepare tools, harness mules, and carry water out to the fields. By the time the sun lifts above the trees, their hands are already busy among the cotton rows. It is a life shaped by seasons and weather more than clocks. You stop near a wooden fence that marks the end of the property. The wood feels rough beneath your fingertips, its surface worn smooth in places where countless hands have rested over the years. Looking back across the field, you see the cabin lantern finally dim as the family inside prepares for sleep. One by one, lights disappear across the scattered farms. Darkness settles over the cotton fields like a blanket. Yet even in the quiet night, you can sense the enormous amount of labour tied to this land. Every plant represents hours of human effort, hope for a successful harvest, and the constant risks that a poor season might undo everything. Life in the Reconstruction South often feels like this, balanced carefully between determination and uncertainty. You leave the fence behind and begin heading back toward the distant glow of town once again. The lantern lights seem smaller now, but they still guide your path through the warm night air. Tomorrow the fields will fill with movement again. Hands reaching, sacks filling, dreams of better seasons growing slowly among the rows of cotton. And your journey through this fragile rebuilding world continues quietly onward. The cotton fields gradually fade behind you as you walk back toward the quiet glow of the town. Night has fully taken hold now, and the air feels thicker with the scent of warm soil and distant wood smoke. The road beneath your boots is softer here, packed earth-worn, smooth by wagon wheels and horse hooves over many years. Ahead, the town square slowly comes into view again. Even at this late hour, a few lanterns still glow inside the buildings that frame the open space. A general store, a blacksmith shop, and a small trading post sit close together around the dusty centre. Their wooden signs sway gently in the night breeze, creaking softly as they move. You step into the square and notice a small group of people gathered near a wagon parked beside the store. The wagon bed is piled with sacks, barrels and crates tied down with thick rope. Two men stand beside it discussing something in low voices, while another checks the harness on a pair of tired mules. Even after sunset, business sometimes continues here. Town markets serve as important lifelines for communities across the Reconstruction South. Farmers, labourers and merchants all depend on these places to exchange goods, information and news from surrounding counties. Records kept by local trading posts during the 1870s reveal just how varied these markets could be. Cotton, tobacco, cornmeal, tools, salt pork, cloth and lamp oil all changed hands in these dusty squares. You wander closer, listening as the conversation between the men drifts through the night air. One of them unties a sack and reaches inside, pulling out a handful of dried beans. He examines them carefully in the lantern light before nodding with quiet approval. Bartering still plays a large role in small towns like this. Cash is often scarce, so goods frequently serve as the currency of daily life. A bushel of corn might be traded for a pair of boots. A sack of cotton might pay for tools or flour. The balance of these trades requires trust and careful negotiation. You lean casually against the side of a water trough, watching as the men begin loading a few more crates into the wagon. The wooden boards groan slightly beneath the weight. Nearby, the door of the general store opens and an older shopkeeper steps out carrying a small lantern. His spectacles glint in the light as he squints toward the wagon. He greets the men with a short nod before pulling a small notebook from his vest pocket. The notebook likely contains the credit accounts of half the town. Merchants during Reconstruction often served as both suppliers and informal bankers for farming families. They extended credit throughout the growing season in exchange for a portion of the harvest later in the year. This arrangement kept the local economy moving, though it could also create complicated financial relationships between farmers and store owners. Economic historians continue to discuss whether the merchant credit system helped stabilise rural communities or contributed to cycles of long-term debt among farmers. The men beside the wagon finish securing the last crate and begin tightening the ropes across the cargo. One of them climbs into the driver's seat and tests the reins, while the mules stamp their hooves impatiently. Before they leave, the shopkeeper reaches into his pocket and hands the driver a folded piece of paper. A list, perhaps. Orders to be delivered to another town. Goods to be picked up along the route. Travel between towns has become an essential part of rebuilding the southern economy. As you watch the wagon prepare to depart, a small detail catches your attention. Hanging from the rear of the wagon is a short string of dried red peppers tied together with twine. This might seem like an ordinary decoration, but travellers sometimes carried such charms for practical reasons. Dried peppers were believed by some wagon drivers to help keep insects away from stored food during long journeys. Whether the peppers truly served that purpose or simply reflected local superstition remains difficult to say. Still, they add a bright splash of colour against the dark wood of the wagon. The driver flicks the reins gently. The mules step forward with a slow but steady pull, their harness chains clinking softly in the night. The wagon wheels begin turning, grinding against the gravel, as the vehicle rolls away from the square and disappears down one of the darker roads leading out of town. For a moment the square grows quiet again. The shopkeeper closes his notebook and returns inside the store, the door shutting with a soft thud. You remain standing near the trough, listening to the distant rumble of the wagon gradually fade into the countryside. Markets like this one serve as more than places to trade goods. They are also centres of information. News about crop prices, rumours of political meetings, stories about opportunities in nearby towns. All of it passes through these spaces carried by travellers and merchants alike. You notice another faint sound drifting across the square now. Music. It comes from a small building at the far edge of town where a warm glow shines through the windows. The slow rhythm of a banjo floats into the night, accompanied by quiet laughter. The market may be closing, but the town itself is not yet asleep. You push yourself away from the trough and begin walking toward the music, your footsteps soft against the dusty ground. Behind you, the empty square rests beneath the stars, waiting for the next day, when wagons will arrive again and the quiet dance of trade will begin once more. The soft music you heard from the edge of the town grows clearer as you walk across the square. The banjo carries a gentle rhythm that drifts easily through the warm night air, its notes rising and falling like a calm conversation. Lantern light spills from the windows of a small wooden hall near the far side of the street. As you approach, the sounds of laughter and quiet voices join the music. The building itself is simple. Rough boards form the walls and the roof sags slightly at the centre, as if it has endured many seasons of southern rain. Yet the windows glow with warmth, and the door stands open to welcome the humid evening breeze. You pause at the entrance and look inside. Several townspeople have gathered after the long workday. A few men sit on wooden chairs arranged along the wall, while others lean comfortably against support beams. In the centre of the room, a young man plucks the strings of his banjo while tapping one foot steadily against the floorboards. Across from him, an older woman keeps time by clapping softly with the rhythm. The atmosphere feels relaxed in a way that the town square earlier did not. Here, the worries of crops, credit and politics seem to loosen their grip for a little while. Even during difficult years, people still find ways to gather. Accounts from the Reconstruction era often mention how community events provided important moments of relief from the pressures of daily life. Social gatherings could take many forms: church meetings, harvest celebrations, shared meals, and informal music nights like this one allowed neighbours to reconnect after exhausting days in the fields. You step quietly into the room and take a seat along the wall. The wood creaks beneath your weight, but no one seems to mind. The banjo player begins a slower tune now. The melody moves gently, almost like a lullaby, and several people hum along under their breath. Music holds a special place in Southern culture during this time. Songs carry memories, stories and emotions that sometimes cannot be spoken directly. Some tunes come from African musical traditions brought generations earlier. Others trace their roots to Irish and Scottish folk melodies. Over time, these influences blend together into the distinct musical voice that fills the room tonight. A few children sit cross-legged on the floor, near the musician, watching his fingers move quickly across the strings. One of them tries to mimic the rhythm by tapping two sticks together. The sound is uneven, but enthusiastic. You notice the warm smell of pine wood drifting from the walls. The room must have been built recently, perhaps as part of the slow rebuilding that continues across many southern towns. Contemporary reports from small communities in the 1870s often describe towns constructing new gathering halls, churches, and meeting spaces as Reconstruction progressed. These buildings became important centres for civic discussions, education, and entertainment. The banjo player finishes his tune and receives a round of gentle applause. A man near the door raises his hand and begins telling a story about a mule that wandered into a neighbour's vegetable garden and refused to leave. His description grows more exaggerated with every sentence, and soon the room fills with quiet laughter. Storytelling is clearly an art form here. As you listen, the lantern light flickers softly across the faces of the audience. Lines of fatigue from long days of labour are still visible, but for the moment they seem lighter. Researchers who study Southern cultural life often note that storytelling traditions played a powerful role in preserving community identity, after the disruptions of the Civil War. Stories could entertain, but they also carried lessons and memories that helped people make sense of the rapidly changing world around them. During a pause in the laughter, someone begins passing around a small tray of food. Slices of cornbread, a bowl of roasted peanuts. Nothing elaborate, but the simple act of sharing food adds another layer of comfort to the evening. You accept a small piece of cornbread and notice its warm, slightly smoky flavour. The taste reminds you how central corn remains to southern cooking. An unusual custom occasionally recorded in rural diaries from this period involves placing the first loaf of cornbread from a new harvest season near the doorway of a home for a short time before eating it. Some families believed the gesture invited prosperity into the household for the coming year. Whether every family followed such traditions is difficult to know. Yet small rituals like this often appear in personal accounts of the era. The evening gathering continues with another song. This time 2 women step forward and begin singing a slow harmony that fills the wooden hall with rich, steady voices. The lyrics speak about rivers, journeys, and the promise of a better tomorrow somewhere beyond the horizon. The room grows quiet while they sing. You notice several listeners closing their eyes, letting the music carry them gently for a few moments. Experts who examine Reconstruction society frequently discuss how music and cultural gatherings helped strengthen community resilience during uncertain times. When political struggles and economic challenges weighed heavily on daily life, these shared experiences provided emotional support that written records sometimes overlook. The song fades into silence, followed by another round of soft applause. Outside the hall, the night has grown deeper. The stars overhead seem brighter now, and the breeze carries the faint scent of river water once again. After a while, the gathering begins to wind down. People stand, stretch tired muscles, and thank the musicians before drifting toward the door. You step outside with them, the warm lantern glow fading behind you as the door closes. The town street is quiet again, yet the gentle rhythm of the banjo still lingers in your memory as you begin walking slowly along the road. Moments like this remind you that life in the Reconstruction South is not defined only by hardship or uncertainty. It also contains music, laughter, and small gatherings that bring neighbours together beneath the same warm southern sky. And somewhere farther down the road, another part of this unfolding story waits quietly in the darkness. You leave the music hall behind and continue down the quiet street. The sound of banjo strings fades slowly until it becomes just another memory carried by the warm night air. Ahead of you, the road stretches towards the edge of town, again where the faint silhouette of a wooden platform and a long iron track can be seen cutting through the darkness. This is the rail stop. It is not much to look at. A narrow station building stands beside the tracks, its roof slanted and its paint faded from years of weather. A single lantern hangs from a hook near the doorway, casting a pale circle of light across the platform. You approach slowly, listening. At first the area seems empty, but then you hear quiet voices coming from the far side of the building. A small group of men sit on crates beside the track, speaking softly while they wait for something. Perhaps the next train, or perhaps simply the next opportunity. Railroads are slowly spreading across the southern landscape again during these years. Many lines were damaged or destroyed during the Civil War, and repairing them has become one of the major efforts of Reconstruction. Crews travel from town to town, laying fresh rails, repairing bridges, and rebuilding stations like this one. Historical transportation records from the early 1870s describe a steady increase in rail activity across the South as companies rushed to reconnect cities with rural communities. For towns like this, the railroad offers something that roads alone cannot provide: speed, connection, possibility. You step onto the wooden platform and feel the boards shift slightly beneath your boots. The lantern light flickers as a breeze slides down the track corridor, carrying with it the metallic scent of iron rails cooling after the heat of the day. The men sitting nearby glance in your direction and nod politely before returning to their conversation. One of them holds a small cloth bundle resting on his knees. Another keeps a worn hat pulled low over his eyes, as if he has spent many hours travelling under the sun. It is easy to imagine their stories. Perhaps they are labourers following the rail construction crews from town to town, or farmers heading toward larger cities to sell crops. Some might even be newly freed workers, searching for wages beyond the farms they left behind. Movement across the country has become more common in the years following the war. People are searching for places where opportunity feels slightly less fragile. You sit on the edge of the platform and listen to the quiet sounds surrounding the station. Crickets chirp steadily in the grass beyond the tracks. A loose board knocks gently against the wall whenever the breeze shifts. Far down the line, a faint vibration begins to hum through the rails. One of the men notices it first. He lifts his head slightly and places a hand on the metal track beside him. The train is coming. Not fast yet, but steadily approaching. Rail travel during the Reconstruction era remains slower and less predictable than the tightly scheduled systems people know today. Delays are common. Mechanical problems appear often. Still, the arrival of a train always creates a small moment of excitement in towns like this. You watch as the lantern inside the station building brightens slightly. The station agent must have heard the same vibration and begun preparing for the train's arrival. A wooden door creaks open and the agent steps outside holding a pocket watch that glints faintly in the lantern light. Researchers who study transportation development often note that railroads played a powerful role in reshaping the southern economy after the war. By reconnecting rural regions with larger markets, rail lines allowed crops, timber, and manufactured goods to move more efficiently across long distances. At the same time, historians examining labour patterns sometimes point out that railroad jobs could be difficult and dangerous. Workers laying track faced exhausting conditions and wages were not always consistent. The rumble in the rails grows louder now. A distant beam of light appears down the track, slowly expanding as the locomotive approaches. The headlamp glows like a small rising moon, illuminating the rails in front of it. The men beside you stand and stretch their legs. One adjusts the strap of his cloth bundle, while another dusts off his coat. As the train draws closer, the quiet countryside fills with new sounds. Steam hisses. Metal wheels grind against the rails. The deep chug of the engine echoes across the fields. For a moment, the peaceful night becomes a scene of energy and motion. The locomotive finally slows beside the platform with a long sigh of steam. The engine's iron body shines faintly under the lantern light and the smell of coal smoke drifts through the air. A conductor steps down onto the platform, carrying a small lantern of his own. He exchanges a few quick words with the station agent, while passengers begin climbing down from the cars. Some carry suitcases, others hold simple bundles tied with rope. Travellers move quickly, eager to stretch their legs after hours inside the rumbling train. A curious detail sometimes mentioned in travel diaries from the 1870s involves the small comfort items passengers carried during long rail journeys. People often packed simple food such as biscuits, dried meat or apples because train dining services were limited on many routes. One traveller even recorded bringing a small pillow from home to soften the wooden seats during overnight trips. Such practical habits remind you that travel during this era remains an adventure requiring patience and preparation. The conductor calls out the name of the town before signalling that the stop will be brief. A few passengers climb aboard while others step down, exchanging quick greetings with waiting friends or relatives. Within minutes, the station activity begins to slow again. The locomotive releases another burst of steam, and the conductor waves his lantern to signal departure. The wheels begin turning once more, slowly at first, then faster as the train disappears down the track, its glowing headlamp shrinking into the distance until the darkness swallows it completely. Silence returns to the station. Only the faint ticking of cooling metal remains. You sit for a moment longer on the quiet platform, watching the empty rails stretch into the night. The train has carried some people away and delivered others into town, quietly weaving this small place into the wider network of a rebuilding nation. Eventually you rise and step back onto the dusty road. Behind you, the lantern at the station burns steadily, waiting for the next train that will arrive sometime tomorrow. And ahead of you, the sleeping town continues to hold countless small stories waiting to unfold. When you leave the quiet rail platform behind, the road leads you once again toward the heart of town. The night air has cooled slightly, though the warmth of the southern climate still lingers like a soft blanket around the streets. Above you, the stars shine clearly, and a thin moon hangs low over the rooftops. As you walk, you begin to notice a sound rising gently across the town. Voices. Not loud voices, but many of them together, drifting from a small white building near the end of the street. It is the church. Even this late in the evening, a warm glow spills from the tall windows, and the steady murmur of a congregation reaches the road. Curiosity draws you closer until you stand near the open doorway. Inside, rows of wooden benches are filled with townspeople sitting shoulder to shoulder beneath the soft light of hanging lanterns. At the front of the room stands a preacher, his hands resting on the edge of a simple pulpit carved from pine. The scent of candle wax and polished wood fills the air. A few children sit quietly beside their parents, trying their best to stay awake as the service continues. Religion plays an important role in many communities during the Reconstruction years. Churches often serve not only as places of worship, but also as centres of education, discussion and organisation. Contemporary records from southern towns during the 1870s frequently mention newly established congregations formed by formerly enslaved people. Many communities built their own churches from the ground up, creating spaces where they could gather freely and shape their own spiritual traditions. You step inside quietly and take a place near the back. The preacher speaks slowly and clearly, his voice carrying easily through the room. He talks about endurance, about rebuilding, about the long path toward justice and peace. Every few sentences, someone in the congregation responds softly with agreement. A woman near the front hums a quiet melody beneath her breath as the sermon continues. These services often stretch longer than modern church gatherings. They can include scripture readings, hymns, personal testimonies, and community announcements all in one evening. You notice a chalkboard leaning against the wall beside the pulpit. Several lines of writing cover its surface, listing times for upcoming meetings. Literacy lessons, charity collections, a gathering to discuss town concerns. Church buildings frequently serve as meeting places where important decisions about community life are discussed. Scholars examining Reconstruction society often point out that black churches became some of the most influential institutions in newly freed communities. They provided leadership education and a sense of unity during years when political and economic conditions could feel unstable. The preacher finishes his message and invites the congregation to sing. A woman near the front begins the hymn, her voice rising gently through the room. Soon others join in their harmonies, filling the wooden building with sound that feels both powerful and peaceful. You recognise the slow rhythm of the song even if you do not know the exact words. Music again finds its place at the centre of community life. As the hymn continues, you notice something small but interesting near the doorway. A basket sits on a table beside the entrance filled with folded pieces of cloth. Local church traditions sometimes included quiet acts of charity like this. Families who had extra fabric or clothing would place items in a basket so neighbours in need could take them discreetly. The practice allowed help to be given without embarrassment, strengthening the sense that the congregation looked after its own members. After the final verse fades, the preacher offers a short prayer. The room grows still as heads bow and hands fold together. Outside, the crickets continue their steady nighttime chorus. When the prayer ends, the congregation begins to disperse slowly. People greet one another, warmly exchanging news about crops, relatives, or upcoming events. A few remain behind to speak privately with the preacher near the front. Religious gatherings often become important spaces where community concerns are shared and advice is offered. Researchers studying the period continue to examine how these church networks helped shape political awareness during Reconstruction. Many meetings discussing voting rights education and civic participation took place in church buildings like this one. You step back outside as the crowd gradually leaves the building. The night feels quieter now, though the warmth from the gathering still seems to linger in the air. A few lanterns move along the road as families walk home together. Their soft light bounces gently across the ground with each step. One small boy walks beside his mother carrying a worn hymn book almost as large as his hands. He studies the pages carefully while they walk, tracing the printed words with his finger. Moments like this hint at the changes slowly unfolding across the South. Learning to read, building communities, searching for stability after years of upheaval. You pause for a moment on the church steps and look back at the glowing windows behind you. Inside, the preacher is extinguishing the last lanterns. Soon, the building will be dark until the next service calls the congregation together again. With the town settling into deeper quiet, you continue your walk down the road. The faint smell of pine and candle smoke drifts behind you as the church fades into the night. And somewhere farther along the street, another part of life in this rebuilding southern town quietly awaits. You leave the quiet church behind and follow the road deeper into town. The voices of the departing congregation fade slowly until they blend with the nighttime sounds that now fill the streets. A few lanterns still glow along the road, their light wavering gently as the warm breeze moves through the trees. Most homes are dark now, yet one building farther ahead still shows clear signs of activity. The windows shine brightly and the smell of medicine drifts faintly through the air. It is a small clinic, little more than a converted house, with a wooden sign hanging outside the door. You walk closer and notice a horse tied to the fence beside the building. Its ears flick back and forth as it listens to the night. Inside, shadows move across the walls as someone tends to work that cannot wait until morning. Illness remains a constant presence in towns across the Reconstruction South. Medical care exists, but it is limited by resources, distance, and the knowledge available at the time. Records from public health reports during the 1870s describe repeated outbreaks of diseases such as smallpox, cholera, and yellow fever in parts of the South. Communities often struggled to respond quickly because trained doctors and proper medical supplies were scarce in many rural areas. You step quietly onto the small porch outside the clinic. The wooden boards creak beneath your weight, though the sound does not seem to disturb the people working inside. Through the open window, you glimpse a doctor bending over a narrow bed. His sleeves are rolled up and his hands move carefully as he checks the condition of a patient resting beneath a thin blanket. A woman stands nearby holding a lantern so the doctor can see clearly. The room smells strongly of herbs, alcohol and boiled cloth. Medical practice during this time blends formal training with practical improvisation. Some physicians studied at established medical schools in cities, while others learned through apprenticeships or military service during the war. In many small towns, a single doctor may serve hundreds of families scattered across miles of countryside. You hear the doctor speak quietly, reassuring the patient, while preparing another cloth soaked in cool water. His voice remains calm and steady, a skill as important as any medicine he carries. The woman beside him nods and replaces the lantern on a nearby table. Outside, you lean lightly against the porch railing and watch the street. The town feels even quieter now that most people have gone to sleep. Occasionally a wagon passes slowly along the road, its wheels turning carefully to avoid waking the neighbourhood. Medical visits often happen late at night like this. When illness appears suddenly, families ride through darkness to fetch the town doctor, hoping he can arrive before a fever worsens. Researchers studying Reconstruction era healthcare often discuss the enormous challenges doctors faced in rural communities. Limited transportation, unpredictable supplies, and the absence of modern antibiotics meant that even minor illnesses could become serious threats. Despite these difficulties, many physicians worked tirelessly to treat patients across wide regions. A small but fascinating detail from the era appears in several medical diaries kept by doctors travelling through southern towns. Some physicians carried leather satchels filled not only with medicines, but also with small personal items meant to comfort anxious patients. Peppermint candy for children. A deck of playing cards to distract nervous adults. Even small storybooks to read aloud during long recoveries. These simple gestures often helped ease fear during difficult moments. From inside the clinic, you hear the soft clink of glass bottles as the doctor prepares a mixture. The faint scent of alcohol drifts through the open window again. After a few minutes, the door opens and the doctor steps briefly onto the porch to breathe the cooler night air. He removes his spectacles and rubs his eyes, clearly tired from the long day. When he notices you nearby, he offers a polite nod before glancing up at the sky. Doctors in rural towns often work from early morning until well after midnight, travelling between farms, cabins and townhouses whenever someone calls for help. Interpretations of medical progress during Reconstruction vary among historians. Some emphasise how slowly professional healthcare expanded into rural areas, while others highlight the dedication of individual doctors who serve communities despite limited resources. Either way, standing here on this quiet porch makes it clear how much responsibility rests on the shoulders of a single physician. The doctor finishes his moment of rest and returns inside to continue his work. The lantern light shifts again across the window as he moves around the room. You step down from the porch and continue along the street. The clinic remains behind you, its windows glowing steadily like a small lighthouse of care in the sleeping town. Farther down the road, the houses grow darker and quieter. Only the occasional flicker of a dying hearthfire appears through a window. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster calls, early confused by the lantern light, or perhaps by the faint glow of the rising moon. The town rests, but life never fully pauses. Doctors continue working. Farmers prepare for tomorrow's labour. Families sleep lightly, ready to wake if a child cries or mule breaks loose from its fence. You walk slowly through the peaceful darkness, feeling the steady rhythm of this Reconstruction town continuing around you, step by step, night after night, one quiet moment of endurance at a time. The quiet glow of the clinic fades behind you as you continue down the dusty street. Most of the town now sleeps beneath the warm southern night, yet the silence never feels completely empty. Insects hum in the tall grass beside the road, and somewhere in the distance a mule shifts in its stall with a slow, heavy shuffle. You follow the road as it bends toward the town square again. The lanterns that once lit the market have been dimmed, though one still burns faintly beside the courthouse building. The courthouse stands at the edge of the square like a patient observer of the town's daily struggles. Its brick walls are sturdier than most buildings here, and the wooden steps leading to the entrance show deep grooves worn by years of footsteps. You walk closer and sit briefly on the bottom step. During the day, this place fills with voices. Lawyers speaking carefully. Witnesses recounting events. Town officials discussing property lines, debts, and disputes that arise whenever a community rebuilds itself after conflict. Even now, long after midnight, the courthouse carries a quiet sense of authority. Documents preserved from county courts during the Reconstruction years reveal that local legal systems were overwhelmed with cases. Property ownership had become complicated after the war, especially when former plantation lands were divided or sold. Freedmen sometimes brought cases seeking fair wages or protection under new labour laws. Landowners brought their own complaints when crops failed or debts went unpaid. The legal landscape of the South had grown far more complex than it had been before the war. You run your fingers lightly along the smooth wooden railing beside the steps. The wood feels cool now that the evening heat has finally faded. A lantern flickers in one of the courthouse windows. At first you assume someone simply forgot to extinguish it, but then the shadow of a moving figure passes across the glass. Someone is still awake inside. Curious, you stand and move a little closer to the building. Through the window you see a man seated at a long table covered in papers. His coat hangs over the back of his chair while he studies a document beneath the lantern light. Perhaps a clerk finishing his work. Perhaps a lawyer preparing for tomorrow's hearing. Reconstruction laws changed many aspects of Southern governance, and local courts became the places where those changes were interpreted and enforced. The man inside dips his pen into an ink bottle and continues writing. The scratching sound carries faintly through the open window. Many officials during this period spent long hours documenting land claims, recording labour contracts, and filing new legal codes passed by state governments. The paperwork of rebuilding society required nearly as much effort as rebuilding the physical towns. Modern researchers who study these legal records often remark on how they reveal the daily struggles of ordinary citizens trying to navigate new rights and responsibilities. Court files contain stories of disputes over crops, wages, livestock, and even school funding. Each document represents a moment when someone sought fairness or resolution through the law. A faint breeze passes through the square, causing the courthouse lantern to sway slightly on its hook. The light shifts across the steps where you stand. Not far from the building sits a wooden notice board filled with folded papers pinned beneath small nails. Even at night you can make out a few handwritten announcements. Upcoming elections, tax notices, land auctions. Political life in the Reconstruction South often centred around notices like these. Public boards allowed citizens to read government decisions and learn about meetings or voting opportunities. Scholars examining this period frequently discuss the complicated political atmosphere that surrounded these announcements. New laws expanded voting rights to black men, which dramatically changed local elections. At the same time, resistance to those changes created tensions that sometimes erupted into conflict. The balance between progress and opposition defined much of the political climate during the 1870s. You step closer to the notice board and read a faded flyer announcing a community meeting scheduled for the following week. The handwriting is careful but slightly uneven, suggesting it was prepared quickly by someone not used to writing long messages. The meeting will discuss improvements to the town road leading toward the river crossing. Infrastructure projects like roads and bridges were vital to the region's recovery. Many communities relied on volunteer labour or small local taxes to repair transportation routes damaged during the war years. As you continue examining the board, one particular note catches your eye. It advertises a public debate to be held at the courthouse next month concerning education funding. Education remains a topic that stirs strong opinions across the South during Reconstruction. Some citizens enthusiastically support the creation of public schools, while others question the cost and purpose of these institutions. Academic discussions about Reconstruction often highlight how debates over education shaped the political identity of many towns. School systems built during these years would influence generations of students long after Reconstruction officially ended. You glance back toward the courthouse window. Inside, the clerk finally leans back from the table and stretches his tired arms. He rubs his eyes before carefully stacking the papers into a neat pile. For a moment he pauses, staring at the lantern flame as if gathering his thoughts. Then he extinguishes the light. The window goes dark. You return to the steps and look across the square. The town lies quiet beneath the stars, yet beneath that calm surface, important decisions and arguments continue shaping the future. Courts will open again in the morning. More documents will be written. More voices will rise inside those brick walls, seeking justice, compromise, or simple understanding. You stand and leave the courthouse behind, continuing your slow walk through the sleeping town. The road ahead disappears into the gentle darkness, where the next chapter of this Reconstruction night patiently waits. You leave the courthouse steps behind and continue along the quiet road that curves gently past the sleeping town square. The night has grown softer now, and the air carries a faint hint of moisture drifting up from the nearby river. The lanterns that once lit the centre of town are almost entirely dark, leaving only a pale glow from the moon to guide your path. Your boots press into the dusty road as you move toward the outskirts again, where the town slowly gives way to open countryside. The smell of animals becomes stronger here. Horses rest in wooden stables, their breath rising slowly in the cool air. Somewhere inside a barn, a cow shifts its weight and lets out a low, sleepy rumble. You pass a wagon parked beside a fence, its wooden wheels leaning slightly from the long day's use. Travel in this region still depends heavily on wagons and horses, especially for people living miles away from rail lines. Records from transportation reports of the 1870s indicate that dirt roads remained the primary method of travel for most rural Southerners during Reconstruction. Railroads were expanding, but many farms and small communities still relied on simple wagon routes connecting towns, rivers and trading posts. You reach a narrow stretch of road where tall pine trees line both sides. Their branches sway gently overhead, creating a soft whispering sound as the breeze passes through the needles. The scent of pine mixes with the earthy smell of damp soil beneath your feet. In the distance you hear something else now, the steady rhythm of hooves approaching. A horse and carriage soon appear around the bend, moving slowly under the faint moonlight. The driver holds a lantern near the front seat, its warm glow bouncing with each movement of the horse. As the carriage draws closer, you notice the wagon bed is stacked with wooden crates and sacks tied carefully together. Late-night deliveries are not unusual. Farmers often choose to travel during cooler hours to spare their horses from the intense daytime heat. The road feels calmer at night as well, free from the bustle of market wagons and daytime travellers. The driver tips his hat politely as he passes the lantern, briefly illuminating his tired but friendly expression. You watch the carriage disappear into the darkness behind you, the soft clatter of wheels fading slowly down the road. A curious detail appears in several travel journals written during this period. Some wagon drivers carried small bells tied loosely to their harnesses, when travelling through heavily wooded roads at night. The gentle ringing warned other travellers that a carriage was approaching long before it appeared around a bend. The bells also helped prevent collisions in areas where the road narrowed between thick trees. You continue walking beneath the pines, listening to the quiet sounds of the countryside. Owls call from distant branches, frogs croak from hidden ponds. The landscape feels alive, even while most of the people nearby sleep. Eventually the trees open into a small clearing where a wooden bridge crosses a shallow creek. The water below reflects the moonlight like scattered pieces of silver. You step onto the bridge and pause, resting your hands on the railing while listening to the soft trickle of water passing beneath. Creeks and rivers shaped the lives of southern communities long before railroads and highways existed. Waterways provided drinking water, irrigation for crops, and natural transportation routes for moving goods. Historical maps from the Reconstruction era often reveal how towns developed near these water sources, relying on them for survival as well as trade. The wooden planks beneath your boots creak quietly as you shift your weight. Not far from the bridge, you notice the faint outline of a small mill building standing beside the creek. The water wheel rests motionless now, but during the day it turns steadily as the current pushes against its paddles. Mills played a vital role in rural economies, grinding corn into meal or processing lumber for new construction projects. Economic historians studying the rebuilding of southern infrastructure often point out that small mills like this one help supply materials needed for houses, barns, schools and churches during Reconstruction. Without them, rebuilding towns would have taken far longer. You leave the bridge and continue along the road until the mill fades behind you. Soon the distant glow of town lanterns begins to appear once more between the trees. The road you follow forms a wide circle around the town, touching farms' creeks and gathering places before returning again to the main streets. It allows you to see the quiet connections that tie the community together. Fields, roads, bridges, markets, schools, churches. Each piece supports the others in ways that may not be obvious during busy daylight hours. You step back onto the broader road leading toward town, just as a light breeze rustles the tall grass along the roadside. The sound reminds you that morning will eventually arrive. Farmers will rise before sunrise. Wagons will return to the market square and the courthouse will open its doors again. For now, however, the Reconstruction South rests in this quiet moment between yesterday's labour and tomorrow's work. You continue walking slowly toward the faint lantern glow ahead, the road stretching peacefully beneath your feet as the night carries on around you. The road guides you gently back toward the quiet cluster of houses at the edge of town. By now, the night has settled into a deep stillness, the kind that only comes in the hours after midnight, when even the most restless travellers have found a place to rest. The sky above looks vast and calm, dotted with stars that shimmer faintly through the humid southern air. A faint glow appears ahead, not from lanterns or homes, but from the soft light of a kitchen hearth still burning somewhere nearby. You follow the smell before you see the house itself. Warm cornmeal, a trace of wood smoke, something savoury simmering slowly in an iron pot. The small wooden home sits beside a narrow vegetable garden bordered by low fences. Inside, through the window, you can see a woman standing beside a stove, while another person sets bowls across a table. Even at this late hour, some households are finishing their evening meal. Food preparation in the Reconstruction South rarely follows strict schedules. Long work days in the fields often mean supper happens whenever everyone finally returns home. Period household accounts written by women during the 1870s describe kitchens as the busiest rooms in rural homes. Cooking fires burned nearly all day, providing heat for meals, boiling water, preserving vegetables and warming the house during cooler seasons. You step quietly past the garden fence and pause beneath a pecan tree growing beside the house. Inside the kitchen, the woman lifts the heavy lid from a cast iron pot. Steam escapes in a gentle cloud, filling the room with the comforting smell of beans simmered with smoked meat. Cornbread rests nearby on a wooden board. Simple food, but filling. The family gathers around the table with tired movements that suggest a long day of work behind them. One child rubs sleepy eyes while another reaches eagerly for a slice of bread. Meals like this often rely on ingredients that can be grown or preserved locally. Corn, beans, greens from small garden plots, salted pork when it is available. Surviving farm records from the era show that many families maintained small kitchen gardens beside their homes. These gardens provided vegetables that supplemented the main crops grown for sale, helping households stretch their food supplies through difficult seasons. You watch quietly as the family begins eating. The father dips a spoon into the pot and tastes the stew before nodding with approval. A quiet conversation begins around the table, though the words are too soft to hear clearly from outside. Kitchen tables, like this one, often become the centre of family life after sunset. Stories are shared, plans for the next day are discussed, and children listen carefully to the grown-ups, speaking about crops, weather, or town news. A breeze stirs the leaves of the pecan tree above you, causing a few to rustle softly in the darkness. An interesting culinary habit occasionally mentioned in rural diaries from this period involves saving bacon grease in small jars after cooking. The grease served as a valuable ingredient used later to flavour vegetables or fry bread. Nothing went to waste in kitchens where resources were limited. Inside the house, the youngest child finishes eating and begins tracing shapes in a patch of flour scattered across the table. The child seems to be practicing letters learned earlier at the small school tent you visited. Education has begun reaching even into simple moments like these. Researchers who examine family life during Reconstruction often explore how education slowly became part of everyday household routines. Parents who had never attended school themselves sometimes encouraged their children to practice reading and writing whenever spare moments appeared. The desire for learning spread quietly through many communities. The woman at the stove finishes cleaning the pot and hangs it from a hook above the hearth. She wipes her hands on a cloth before blowing out the lantern beside the table. The room grows dimmer lit now, only by the soft orange glow of the dying fire. Outside, the garden rests peacefully beneath the moonlight. Rows of beans climb thin wooden poles. Cabbage leaves spread low across the soil. A few tomato vines twist around simple stakes driven into the earth. These gardens provide more than food. They represent small pieces of independence, allowing families to rely slightly less on store purchases during uncertain economic times. You continue along the road, leaving the quiet house behind. Soon, another building appears ahead, larger than the others, and surrounded by stacks of firewood. The faint smell of tobacco drifts through the air as you draw closer. This place is a curing shed. Inside, rows of tobacco leaves hang from wooden beams, drying slowly in the warm night air. The scent is strong, but oddly sweet. Agricultural reports from the Reconstruction years indicate that tobacco remained an important cash crop in several southern states alongside cotton. Farmers often grew both crops depending on soil conditions and market prices. The curing process required patience. Leaves had to dry gradually to preserve their flavour and colour before they could be sold. You step closer to the open doorway and glance inside. The hanging leaves sway gently whenever the breeze moves through the shed. Their shadows stretch across the walls like thin curtains. For a moment, the place feels almost silent except for the faint creaking of wooden beams. Then somewhere nearby, a rooster calls again, fooled by the lantern glow from a distant house. The sound echoes softly through the fields. Morning is still hours away, but life in this town never truly stops moving. You leave the tobacco shed behind and return once more toward the sleeping streets. The quiet kitchens, gardens, and curing barns you have passed tonight form the hidden backbone of the town's daily survival. Meals prepared, crops tended, families resting before another long day begins. And as you walk beneath the wide southern sky, the Reconstruction South continues rebuilding itself in these quiet, ordinary moments. You leave the tobacco shed behind and follow the road as it drifts gently toward a cluster of buildings near the centre of town. The moon has climbed higher now, and its pale light rests across rooftops, fences, and quiet dirt streets. The town feels almost dreamlike at this hour, as if the entire place has taken a long, slow breath after the work of the day. A faint sound reaches you ahead. Soft music. Not loud, not lively, like a daytime gathering, but gentle and steady. You move closer and soon notice a warm glow spilling from the open doorway of a modest wooden building near the corner of the street. It is the town's church. The structure itself is simple. White painted boards, a small bell tower, and narrow windows that allow lantern light to slip out into the darkness. During the day, the church hosts sermons, community meetings, and sometimes even classes when school space is limited. But tonight, something quieter is happening inside. You step carefully toward the door and glance through the opening. A small group of people sits on wooden benches near the front of the room. A man holds a worn guitar while another person taps a gentle rhythm with a foot against the floorboards. Someone begins to sing. The voice is low and steady, carrying a melody that fills the small room with warmth. Others join softly, their voices blending together in slow harmony. Even from the doorway, you can feel how calm the moment is. Religious gatherings formed an essential part of community life across the Reconstruction South. Churches often served as centres for worship, education, political meetings, and social support. Records from church organisations during the 1870s show that many congregations expanded rapidly during these years, especially among newly freed black communities who built independent churches for the first time. Inside the room, the singers continue their quiet hymn. Their voices rise and fall slowly, the sound drifting out through the open windows and across the quiet street. You step inside and sit near the back bench, careful not to disturb the gathering. Lanterns hang from simple hooks along the walls, casting a golden glow over the wooden floor. The scent of candle wax mixes with the faint smell of pine boards warmed by the day's heat. A young boy near the front follows along with the melody, though his voice cracks slightly when the notes climb higher. The adults around him smile gently but continue singing without pause. Music has a way of smoothing away the tired edges of a long day. Several travel writers who visited the southern states after the Civil War remarked on the powerful role of music in church gatherings. Songs carried stories of hardship, hope, and endurance, often passed from one generation to the next without ever being written down. The hymn eventually fades into silence. For a moment, nobody speaks. The quiet feels peaceful rather than awkward, like the calm surface of a pond after ripples disappear. Then the man with the guitar strums a few light notes and begins another song. This one moves slightly faster. A few people clap softly in rhythm. An unusual detail occasionally mentioned in personal journals from Reconstruction towns involves how churches sometimes doubled as nighttime gathering places, where neighbours could exchange news, settle small disagreements, or simply share conversation after long days of labour. These informal meetings help maintain a sense of unity in communities still adjusting to enormous social change. The group sings for several more minutes before finally setting the instruments aside. A woman near the front offers a short prayer spoken in a gentle voice. The words carry gratitude for the harvest, safety for travelling family members, and hope for the coming seasons. When she finishes, the group begins quietly gathering their belongings. Lanterns are lowered. Benches creak softly as people stand. Outside, the night greets them again with cool air and the distant sound of insects in the fields. You step back into the street along with the others. Some exchange warm goodnights before heading down different roads toward their homes. The church door closes behind the final person leaving the building. Moments later, the lanterns inside are extinguished one by one. Darkness settles again across the small white structure. Historians who study the cultural life of the Reconstruction era often explore how churches became places where newly freed citizens organised schools, mutual aid societies and political meetings. These institutions helped shape leadership and community identity during a time when many social systems were being rebuilt. You walk slowly past the churchyard fence, listening as the last footsteps fade down the street. The town has returned to silence once more. Far above, the stars remain steady and bright, watching over the quiet roads and wooden houses scattered across the landscape. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks once before settling down again. The breeze moves gently through nearby oak trees, rustling leaves that whisper softly together. You continue along the street at an unhurried pace, letting the calm rhythm of the night guide your steps. Tonight you have passed through kitchens and fields, courtrooms and barns, gardens and bridges, each place revealing a small piece of how people live in this recovering southern town. Now the church joins that quiet collection of memories, a place where voices rise in song, where neighbours gather, and where hope continues to take root despite the long shadows of the past. The road ahead bends gently toward the darker edge of town again, where new scenes of this peaceful Reconstruction night are waiting. You continue walking beyond the quiet churchyard, letting the soft crunch of dirt beneath your boots guide you through the sleeping streets. The town feels even calmer now. Most lanterns have gone dark, and the few remaining lights flicker lazily in windows where someone has not yet drifted to sleep. The road carries you toward a slightly larger building at the far edge of the main street. Unlike the homes and small shops you passed earlier, this structure has a broad wooden porch stretching across its front. A faded sign hangs above the door, gently creaking in the night breeze. This is the town's general store. During the day, the porch would be full of voices. Farmers leaning against the railing, children waiting patiently with coins in their hands, wagons stopping briefly while travellers step inside to purchase supplies before continuing down the road. Now the building rests quietly beneath the moon. You step onto the porch and sit on one of the long benches that runs along the wall. The wood is still warm from the heat of the day. Through the front window you can see rows of shelves inside the store. Large sacks of flour and sugar sit stacked beside barrels filled with nails, tools and dried goods. General stores served as the economic heart of many southern towns during the Reconstruction years. Merchants stocked a wide variety of items because smaller communities often had no separate shops for specific trades. Surviving business ledgers from stores in the 1870s reveal a surprising range of goods sold in a single location. Families might purchase lamp oil, fabric, coffee beans, wagon parts, medicine, and even school books, all from the same counter. You lean back slightly against the wooden wall and imagine what the store sounds like during the day. Boots thumping across the floorboards, the rattle of coins on the counter, the scrape of barrels being rolled across the room. A breeze drifts through the porch railing and carries with it the faint smell of molasses stored somewhere inside. Molasses remains a common sweetener in many southern kitchens at this time. Sugar can be expensive, especially in smaller rural communities, so thick syrup made from sugarcane becomes a practical substitute in cooking and baking. One curious habit occasionally mentioned in rural letters from the period involves children dipping cornbread directly into small cups of molasses during meals. The sticky sweetness made a simple piece of bread feel like a treat. You glance toward the edge of the porch where a rocking chair sits empty. Its curved runners move slightly when the breeze nudges them, producing a quiet wooden creak. Porches like this one often become gathering places in the evening hours. Neighbours stop by after supper. Farmers discuss crop prices or weather forecasts. Travellers share news from distant towns along the rail lines. Scholars who study rural commerce sometimes examine how these informal conversations outside general stores helped spread information long before telephones or radios existed. In many ways, the porch served as a community bulletin board made of people rather than paper. A faint clinking sound reaches your ears from the side of the building. You stand and walk slowly along the porch to investigate. Behind the store sits a small storage shed with its door slightly open. Inside you can see stacks of wooden crates filled with glass bottles. You pick one up and hold it toward the moonlight. It once held soda water. Bottled sodas were beginning to appear in some American towns during the late 19th century, though they remained a novelty in many rural areas. Small soda fountains were slowly gaining popularity in larger cities, offering flavoured drinks made with carbonated water. The idea of sipping fizzy beverages while chatting at a counter would probably seem quite luxurious to many farmers who spend their days working beneath the hot sun. You set the bottle back into the crate and close the shed door gently. The town remains quiet, but the sky has changed slightly while you were exploring the store. The stars now appear a little softer, as if a thin veil of cloud is drifting across them. Somewhere in the distance, you hear the faint whistle of a train. The sound is long and low, echoing across the countryside before fading again into silence. Railroads played a crucial role in reconnecting southern economies after the Civil War. Government reports from the Reconstruction period describe steady efforts to rebuild damaged tracks and expand rail lines linking towns to larger trade centres. Even if this town does not sit directly beside the tracks, the distant whistle reminds everyone that goods and travellers are moving again across the region. You return to the porch bench for a moment longer, letting the quiet stretch comfortably around you. The general store may be silent now, but tomorrow it will open its doors once again. Farmers will arrive with wagons full of produce. Children will stare wide-eyed at jars of candy behind the counter. Merchants will weigh flour, cut fabric, and record purchases carefully into thick ledgers. For tonight, however, the store rests peacefully waiting for the next sunrise to bring back the familiar rhythm of trade and conversation. You step down from the porch and continue along the road, leaving the gentle creak of the rocking chair behind you as the calm Reconstruction night carries you onward. You leave the general store behind and follow the road as it bends gently toward the quieter edge of town. The night air feels cooler now, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and river water drifting through the fields. Above you the sky stretches wide and peaceful, its stars slightly dimmed by a thin blanket of clouds slowly crossing the horizon. The street here grows narrower. Wooden fences line the roadside, separating small yards from the dusty path. Beyond them, you can see low houses sitting quietly in the darkness, their windows dark except for the occasional flicker of a dying lantern. A soft metallic sound reaches your ears. Clink, clink. You pause and listen again. The sound comes from farther down the road, steady and patient. As you walk closer, you begin to see a small open yard surrounded by posts and rails. In the centre stands a wooden structure with a long horizontal beam and a bucket hanging from a rope. A well. Beside it, a man slowly lowers another bucket into the water below. The rope slides through the pulley with that same gentle clinking sound you heard earlier. When the bucket reaches the water, it splashes softly, echoing faintly up the stone shaft. The man draws the rope upward, hand over hand, until the bucket appears again, dripping cool water into the night air. You watch quietly from the roadside. Water wells formed the lifeline of many southern towns during the 19th century. Municipal plumbing systems would not reach most rural communities until decades later, so wells, like this one, supplied drinking water, cooking water and washing water for entire neighbourhoods. County records from several southern states during the 1870s show that towns often maintained shared wells near crossroads or public buildings, so residents could collect water without travelling long distances. The man lifts the bucket onto the stone edge and fills 2 metal pails resting nearby. His movements look practised and calm, as if he has repeated this routine every evening for years. He glances up and nods politely when he notices you nearby. Nighttime trips to the well are not unusual. Drawing water during the cooler hours saves effort after long days spent working in fields beneath the sun. Once the pails are full, he lifts them carefully and begins the slow walk toward a nearby house, the water sloshing gently with each step. You step closer to the well and look down into its dark opening. Moonlight reflects faintly off the water far below, creating a small shimmering circle surrounded by shadow. A fascinating detail appears in several travel accounts written by visitors to southern towns during this era. Some wells were believed to possess special qualities depending on the minerals in the underground water. People occasionally claimed that certain wells produced water that tasted sweeter or colder than others nearby. Whether this belief had scientific truth or simply reflected local pride remains uncertain, but communities often favoured one well above another for drinking water. You touch the cool stone edge before continuing along the road. Not far ahead, another building appears larger than the surrounding houses. Its yard contains several long wooden racks standing in neat rows. At first they look like simple frames. Then the breeze shifts and you notice strips of fabric hanging from the racks, gently fluttering in the night air. You have found the town laundry yard. During daylight hours, these racks would be crowded with freshly washed clothes drying beneath the sun. Shirts, dresses and bed linens would sway slowly in the breeze, like a field of white flags. Household letters written during the Reconstruction years often describe laundry as one of the most demanding weekly chores. Washing required heating large kettles of water over outdoor fires, scrubbing garments against wooden washboards, and rinsing everything repeatedly before hanging the pieces to dry. You walk slowly between the empty racks. A few forgotten clothespins still cling to the lines, clicking softly when the breeze nudges them together. Soap used for washing clothes was frequently made at home rather than purchased from stores. Families produced it by combining animal fat with lye, creating a strong cleaning mixture that could handle the heavy dirt of farm work. The faint smell of soap still lingers in the air around the yard. Researchers studying domestic labour in the 19th century often emphasise how much time women spent maintaining households through tasks like washing, cooking, sewing, and preserving food. These daily efforts formed the quiet foundation that kept families functioning through difficult economic times. You leave the laundry racks behind and return to the road once more. The town grows quieter with every step. Even the insects seem to hum more softly now. A breeze passes across the open fields beyond the houses, bending tall grass that rustles like gentle waves. The air feels cooler against your skin, hinting that the darkest part of the night has nearly passed. Somewhere far away, another rooster calls, too early fooled again by lantern light or moonshine. The sound echoes across the fields before fading away. You continue along the road, letting the calm rhythm of your footsteps match the slow breathing of the town around you. Tonight you have wandered past markets, churches, kitchens and stores. You have listened to music drifting from open doors and watched lanterns fade one by one as families settle into sleep. Now the quiet well and the empty laundry yard join that collection of peaceful nighttime scenes. Each place tells a small part of the story of how people live here in the Reconstruction South. And as the night deepens gently around you, the town continues resting beneath the watchful stars, waiting patiently for the first pale hints of dawn. The road grows softer beneath your feet as you leave the well and laundry yard behind. The town now thins into scattered houses and open patches of land where gardens and small fields stretch quietly beneath the moon. The air carries the gentle smell of soil and grass that is cooled after the long heat of the day. Somewhere nearby, wood crackles. You follow the faint sound and soon notice a dim orange glow flickering behind a low fence. It comes from a small outdoor fire pit beside a cabin. A man sits beside the fire, slowly carving a piece of wood with a pocket knife. Each movement is careful and unhurried, the blade shaving thin curls that fall softly onto the ground near his boots. The firelight casts warm shadows across the cabin wall. You stop near the fence and watch quietly. In towns like this, one evening hours often become the only time when people can rest their hands after long days of labour. Farming, hauling, building and repairing leave little space for quiet hobbies during daylight. But the night offers a slower rhythm. The man pauses, holds up the piece of wood and studies his progress. It appears to be the beginning of a simple wooden handle, perhaps, for a tool that broke earlier in the day. Accounts written by residents during the 1870s often mention how common it was for farmers to repair their own equipment rather than purchase replacements. Tools were expensive and supplies could take weeks to arrive if ordered from larger towns. Resourcefulness was simply part of daily life. You lean gently against the fence post while the man continues carving. The fire crackles again, sending a brief swirl of sparks upward before they disappear into the darkness above. Woodworking became an important skill in many rural communities throughout the 19th century. Small repairs to wagons, ploughs, fences and furniture were handled by farmers themselves or by neighbours who had learned basic carpentry. Local government reports from the Reconstruction years frequently mention how towns relied on skilled craftsmen, such as blacksmiths, carpenters and wheelwrights, to keep tools and transportation working smoothly. Without those trades, farming life would have been far more difficult. The man sets the carving aside for a moment and reaches for a tin cup resting near the fire. He takes a slow sip before returning to his work. A soft breeze drifts through the yard, carrying the smell of smoke and pine sap. The quiet scene feels almost timeless. An intriguing custom described in several 19th century letters involves neighbours gathering beside evening fires to exchange stories while repairing tools or mending clothing. These small gatherings served as both entertainment and practical cooperation, allowing people to share news while helping each other complete necessary tasks. You imagine several chairs placed around this fire earlier in the evening, neighbours talking, children listening to old stories, someone laughing softly as sparks drift upward. Now the gathering has ended, leaving only the man finishing his quiet project. He finally brushes the wood shavings aside and holds the newly shaped handle closer to the firelight. Satisfied, he nods slightly and sets the piece beside a small pile of tools waiting to be repaired tomorrow. You continue down the road as the firelight fades behind you. The path leads toward a narrow stretch where tall grasses grow along the roadside. Their thin stalks sway gently whenever the wind moves through them. The sound reminds you of ocean waves, though the nearest coastline lies many miles away. Beyond the grass stands a small wooden structure that looks almost like a shed. As you approach, you notice rows of wooden boxes arranged neatly on stands beside the building. Beehives. The faint buzzing of bees still lingers in the air even at this late hour. Beekeeping had already become a useful practice in parts of the rural south by the mid-19th century, honey provided both a natural sweetener and a product that could be sold or traded locally. Agricultural reports from the period mention how farmers sometimes kept a few hives near their gardens to help pollinate crops while producing small amounts of honey. You step closer to one of the hives. The wooden box feels warm from the heat trapped inside during the day. The bees themselves remain mostly quiet now, clustered together inside the hive, where they conserve warmth through the night. A curious belief, occasionally recorded in rural folklore, suggested that bees should be informed whenever important family events occurred. Some people claimed that failing to tell the bees about weddings, births, or deaths could bring misfortune to the household. Whether this belief came from ancient traditions or simple superstition remains uncertain, but the custom appeared in several communities during the 19th century. You smile slightly at the thought of someone leaning close to a hive and whispering news of the day. The road curves again, guiding you back toward the centre of town. The stars appear brighter now that the clouds have drifted away. A faint pale line begins forming along the distant horizon. It is not quite dawn yet, but the first subtle hints of morning are beginning to gather somewhere far beyond the fields. You continue walking slowly, letting the quiet night settle around you. The small fire, the carved tool handle, the sleeping bees in their wooden homes. Each quiet moment reveals another layer of daily life in this Reconstruction town. And as you move gently along the road beneath the fading stars, the peaceful rhythm of the south continues carrying you forward into the slowly approaching morning. You continue along the road while the faint glow along the horizon grows a little brighter. Night still holds the land in its quiet embrace, yet the earliest hints of morning now rest gently in the distance. The air feels cooler than before, and the grass along the roadside glitters faintly with dew. Ahead, the road slopes downward toward a wide open field. Wooden fences stretch across the land in long straight lines, dividing sections of pasture and farmland. A low barn stands near the centre of the field. From inside comes the soft rustle of animals shifting in their stalls. You walk closer, careful not to disturb the quiet scene. The barn doors remain partly open to allow fresh air to move through during the warm months. Moonlight slips through the doorway and spills across the packed dirt floor. Inside, several horses stand calmly in their stalls. One of them lifts its head and watches you with curious eyes before returning to its quiet chewing. Horses remained essential partners in southern agriculture throughout the 19th century. Farm reports from the Reconstruction era frequently mention the importance of horses and mules for ploughing fields, hauling wagons, and transporting goods between towns. Without animal labour, many farms would have struggled to function. You lean gently against the barn door and listen to the peaceful sounds inside. Hooves shifting softly, hay rustling, a slow, steady breathing from the animals resting after a long day of work. The smell of hay fills the air warm and slightly sweet. Farmers often rose before sunrise to feed and harness their animals before beginning the day's labour. That routine meant barns like this one rarely stayed quiet for long once morning arrived. You notice a small lantern hanging from a nail beside the door. Its flame has been turned very low, leaving only a faint glow to guide anyone who might step inside during the night. Beside the lantern sits a wooden bucket filled with fresh water. Providing clean water for animals was an important part of daily farm care. Agricultural journals from the period often emphasised that well-watered horses and mules worked more efficiently and stayed healthier through long planting seasons. You step into the barn and walk slowly along the row of stalls. One horse flicks its tail lazily while another lowers its head deeper into the hay. A gentle breeze drifts through the open doorway, stirring bits of straw across the floor. An interesting detail, sometimes mentioned in rural memoirs from this time, involves how farmers occasionally spoke to their animals as if they were old friends. Long hours spent working side by side in the fields created a quiet companionship between people and the creatures that helped them survive. You imagine a farmer standing here earlier in the evening, brushing dust from a horse's coat while quietly talking about the work waiting tomorrow. Outside the barn, the sky continues to brighten ever so slightly. You step back into the open field and follow the fence line toward a small pond that reflects the fading stars above. The water remains perfectly still. Frogs croak gently from the reeds along the edge, while insects skim across the surface like tiny shadows. Water sources such as ponds and creeks were vital for farms across the south. Government agricultural surveys conducted during the 1870s often noted whether farmland had reliable water nearby, since crops and livestock depended heavily on consistent supply. You kneel beside the pond and watch the faint ripples spreading across the water. The first bird of the morning calls from a nearby tree. Its single note breaks the silence in a soft but unmistakable way. Soon another bird answers from farther away. The quiet chorus of dawn is slowly beginning. Researchers who examine environmental records from the 19th century sometimes discuss how closely farmers watched natural signals like birdsong, wind patterns, and cloud movement to judge weather changes. Without modern forecasts, these observations helped guide decisions about planting, harvesting, and travel. You stand again and follow the path back toward the road. The barn now rests peacefully behind you while the sky continues its slow transformation. Dark blue fades gradually toward pale grey along the eastern horizon. The stars above grow dimmer with each passing moment. You walk past another fenced pasture where a few cattle rest quietly in the grass. One animal lifts its head briefly, then settles again with a slow, contented sigh. Everything feels calm and patient. The Reconstruction south you have been wandering through tonight still carries many hardships. Crops can fail. Markets can shift. Communities continue rebuilding after years of conflict. Yet moments like this one reveal something equally powerful: endurance. Farmers rising each morning. Animals ready for another day of work. Fields waiting for the next planting season. You continue along the road as the first true light of dawn begins to spread across the land. Night has nearly finished its quiet watch over the town, and the new day slowly prepares to begin. You follow the road as the pale edge of dawn slowly spreads across the horizon. The darkness has not vanished yet, but the sky now carries a gentle silver tone that softens every shape in the landscape. Fields that were hidden during the night begin to reveal themselves again, stretching wide across the quiet countryside. The air feels fresh and cool. You breathe in the scent of damp grass and distant pine trees, while walking toward a cluster of low buildings that sit just beyond the fields you passed earlier. These structures appear slightly different from the farmhouses and barns scattered across the land. They look more temporary. Rough wooden walls, canvas stretched across simple frames, smoke rising faintly from a small cooking fire. You've arrived at a labour camp where farm workers stay during the busiest planting and harvest seasons. The camp remains quiet for the moment, though signs of life are beginning to stir. A man steps outside one of the cabins and stretches his arms slowly while looking toward the brightening sky. Another figure kneels beside the fire, adding a few pieces of wood to strengthen the flame. Simple camps like this appeared across parts of the South during the Reconstruction years, especially in areas where large farms still required seasonal labour. Agricultural surveys written during the 1870s mention that many plantations and farms shifted towards systems where labourers lived on or near the land they worked. Some were sharecroppers, while others were hired hands moving from one property to another as work became available. You move quietly along the edge of the camp so you do not interrupt the slow rhythm of the morning. A kettle now hangs above the fire. The water inside begins to heat, sending thin curls of steam into the cool dawn air. Breakfast will likely be simple: cornmeal mush, perhaps a bit of salt pork, if supplies allow, and coffee brewed strong enough to wake tired muscles. Diaries written by travelling merchants during this period sometimes describe how early farm camps woke each morning: fires lit before sunrise, tools gathered quietly, workers sharing quick meals before walking out to the fields. The routine repeated day after day through long growing seasons. A young boy emerges from one of the cabins carrying a wooden bucket. He walks toward a small hand pump set beside the camp and begins working the handle up and down. Water splashes into the bucket with a hollow echo. You notice that the cabins themselves are built from simple boards with narrow gaps between them. These structures are not meant to last forever. They serve as practical shelters during months when labour demands increase. A curious detail appears in several personal letters written by farm owners during the Reconstruction years. Some describe providing small garden patches near labour cabins so workers could grow vegetables for their own families. These small plots sometimes produced beans, squash, or greens that supplemented the basic rations supplied by employers. The idea of these gardens offered at least a measure of independence for families living in camps like this one. The boy finishes filling the bucket and carries it carefully back toward the fire. You continue walking along the dirt path that runs beside the camp. Soon the quiet begins to shift. Another door opens. Someone coughs sleepily. Boots scrape against wooden floors inside the cabins. Morning is waking the camp one small sound at a time. Researchers who examine labour systems in the Reconstruction South often explore how arrangements like sharecropping reshaped rural life after the Civil War. Some scholars emphasise how these systems allowed landowners to resume agricultural production without large permanent workforces. Others point out that many labourers found themselves trapped in cycles of debt due to crop liens and store credit. The full reality likely varied widely from place to place. What remains certain is that communities across the South were experimenting with new ways to rebuild agricultural life. The kettle now begins to rattle softly as the water inside reaches a steady boil. A woman pours coffee grounds into a cloth filter and carefully sets it above a tin pot. The smell of brewing coffee spreads through the camp, rich and earthy. Even from where you stand, the aroma feels comforting. A rooster crows loudly from somewhere beyond the cabins. This time the call is accurate. The sky has grown noticeably brighter and a pale band of sunlight now stretches just above the distant trees. You leave the camp behind and return to the road once more. Fields extend outward in every direction, their soil dark and ready for the day's labour. In a few hours, farmers will begin guiding ploughs through these fields while workers plant seeds that will hopefully grow into the next season's crops. Cotton remains the most important crop in much of the South during this period. Trade records from the late 19th century show that cotton exports continued shaping regional economies even as communities struggle through the challenges of Reconstruction. The road carries you gently uphill, offering a wider view of the land around you. Smoke rises from scattered farmhouses. Birds now circle across the sky, and the sun prepares to climb above the horizon. You pause for a moment and look back toward the quiet camp you just passed. Lantern light has faded there, replaced by the steady glow of morning. People move slowly between cabins and cooking fires, preparing themselves for another long day. Life here is not easy, but it moves forward with patience and determination, one sunrise at a time. And as the first true rays of sunlight begin touching the fields, the Reconstruction South awakens to another day of rebuilding. The sun has not fully risen yet, but the world around you is clearly waking. The sky carries a gentle wash of pale gold near the horizon, and the fields, that stretched like shadows during the night now reveal their true colours. Dew clings to every blade of grass, sparkling faintly as the first light touches the land. You continue walking along the country road, leaving the Labour camp behind. The path bends toward a cluster of larger fields where tall wooden posts mark the edges of farmland. Beyond them stretches a wide patchwork of crops, waiting quietly for the day's work to begin. A faint scraping sound reaches your ears. You follow the noise and soon spot a farmer standing beside a plough near the edge of the field. He is adjusting the leather harness attached to a sturdy mule that waits patiently in front of the wooden frame. The mule flicks its ears and snorts softly while the farmer tightens a buckle. Ploughing begins early in the morning whenever possible. The cooler air makes the work easier for both animals and people before the strong southern sun climbs overhead. Agricultural records from the late 19th century frequently mention that mules became especially valued throughout the South after the Civil War. Their strength, endurance, and ability to handle rough terrain made them ideal companions for farmers rebuilding fields that had gone untended during the war years. You pause beside the fence and watch as the farmer leads the mule forward for the first pass across the field. The plough blade sinks into the soil with a slow, steady motion, turning dark earth upward into neat lines. Each step of the mule presses into the damp ground, leaving clear hoofprints that follow the path of the furrow. The smell of fresh soil rises into the cool air. It carries a rich scent that feels both earthy and hopeful. Planting season requires careful timing. Farmers watch the weather closely, waiting for the right balance of warmth and moisture before placing seeds into the ground. A small flock of birds lands behind the plough, hopping along the newly turned soil in search of insects and worms exposed by the blade. You lean on the fence rail and observe the quiet rhythm of the work. Step, turn, step again. The mule moves steadily while the farmer guides the plough handles with practiced hands. A curious agricultural habit sometimes mentioned in rural farm journals involves farmers speaking gently to their mules while ploughing. Short phrases of encouragement help keep the animals calm and responsive during long hours in the fields. The farmer in front of you seems to follow that tradition. Every so often he murmurs a quiet word to the mule, guiding its direction with voice as much as with reins. Nearby, another figure appears at the edge of the field, carrying a sack of seeds over one shoulder. Planting will begin soon after the rows are prepared. Government crop reports from the Reconstruction era frequently tracked cotton planting with great attention. Cotton remained the most widely grown cash crop across large portions of the southern states, shaping the economic recovery of many rural communities. You continue walking along the fence line as the farmer finishes his first row and turns the mule carefully to begin another. The sky above grows brighter with each passing minute. Sunlight begins spilling across the tops of distant trees, casting long golden beams across the fields. A wagon approaches slowly from down the road, its wooden wheels rolling through the damp dirt. Two young men sit at the front seat while sacks of seed and tools fill the back. They raise their hands in greeting as they pass. Travel between neighbouring farms often begins early in the morning during planting season. Extra hands make the work faster, and families frequently help one another during the busiest agricultural periods. Researchers studying rural cooperation during Reconstruction often highlight these moments of shared labour. Communities that work together during planting and harvest sometimes manage to overcome shortages of equipment or animals that individual farms could not solve alone. You follow the road as it climbs a gentle hill overlooking several fields at once. From here the countryside stretches wide beneath the growing sunlight. Ploughs move slowly across the land. Wagons roll between barns and farmhouses. Thin trails of smoke rise from chimneys where breakfasts are being prepared. The entire region seems to be awakening in a calm, determined rhythm. You sit briefly on a wooden fence post at the top of the hill and watch the activity unfold. Somewhere nearby, a dog begins barking excitedly as it chases a flock of birds from a field. The birds scatter upward in a flurry of wings before settling again farther away. Morning life feels full of quiet purpose. Each person moving through these fields carries responsibilities that help shape the survival of families and communities. Crops planted today will determine food supplies months from now. Work done in the cool hours of morning may spare people from labouring beneath the worst heat of the afternoon. You rise from the fence post and continue down the road again. The sun now clears the horizon completely, bathing the fields in warm golden light. The peaceful night you wandered through has finally given way to the steady movement of a new day. And as farmers guide their ploughs across the land, the Reconstruction South continues its slow effort to rebuild furrow by furrow, sunrise by sunrise. The sun now rests just above the horizon, spreading a warm golden glow across the countryside. The cool quiet of the night has faded, replaced by the gentle movement of a town beginning its day. You follow the road as it curves back toward the main streets you wandered through only a few hours earlier. Everything looks slightly different in the morning light. The buildings that seemed shadowy and mysterious during the night now reveal their simple shapes clearly. Wooden storefronts line the road, their porches empty for the moment, though signs of activity are beginning to appear. One shop door creaks open as you approach. A shopkeeper steps outside holding a broom and begins sweeping the porch in slow, steady strokes. Dust rises gently into the air before drifting away in the morning breeze. Morning cleaning routines were common in many 19th century towns. Merchants often swept their storefronts before customers arrived, clearing away dust carried by wagon wheels and footsteps from the previous day. Town ordinances preserved in several county records from the 1870s even encouraged shopkeepers to keep the walkways in front of their businesses tidy to maintain a welcoming appearance for travellers. You pause nearby while the shopkeeper continues his work. Each sweep of the broom makes a soft scraping sound across the wooden boards. Across the street, another door opens. A woman places a small wooden sign beside the entrance of her shop before adjusting the window shutters to let sunlight inside. The town is waking in small quiet steps. Soon a wagon rolls slowly down the road carrying crates stacked carefully in the back. The driver pulls the reins gently and stops beside the general store you visited during the night. Two men begin unloading the crates onto the porch. You recognise the building immediately. The same rocking chair still rests near the door, though now the early sunlight warms its worn wooden seat. The men open one crate and reveal bundles of fabric folded neatly inside. General stores often receive shipments like this from larger trading towns connected by railroads. Fabric remained an important item for rural communities, where families frequently sewed or repaired their own clothing. Trade ledgers from merchants operating during the Reconstruction era reveal that bolts of cloth thread and sewing needles ranked among the most regularly ordered goods for small town stores. You continue walking down the street as more signs of mourning appear. A baker pushes open the door of a brick building farther ahead. The rich smell of fresh bread drifts out into the street. The baker carries a tray of loaves toward a cooling rack near the window, their crusts golden and steaming slightly in the cool air. Bread baking began early each day in many towns because ovens required time to heat and loaves needed hours to rise before baking. By mid-morning, customers would begin arriving to purchase bread for their families. A delightful culinary detail appears in some 19th century household letters, describing how bakers sometimes brushed fresh loaves with melted butter or molasses to give the crust a sweeter flavour. The result was bread that smelled so inviting that people could often follow the scent down the street to the bakery door. You pause briefly outside the shop, enjoying the comforting aroma. Then you continue along the street, where a group of children now runs past you laughing. They carry small books tucked beneath their arms. School will begin soon. Education slowly expanded across southern communities during the Reconstruction period. State governments and charitable organisations worked to establish public schools where both black and white children could learn basic reading, writing and arithmetic. Enrolment records from the late 19th century show that attendance varied widely depending on location and family circumstances, but the spread of schools marked a major change in education opportunities across the region. The children hurry toward a modest building near the end of the street. You recognise the place from earlier in the night when you visited the tent classroom nearby. Now the wooden schoolhouse stands open with its windows wide to welcome the morning air. A teacher waits at the doorway, greeting each child as they arrive. Some students walk confidently inside, while others hesitate for a moment before stepping through the door. Inside the classroom, desks are arranged in neat rows facing a blackboard mounted at the front wall. A bell rings softly. Lessons will begin soon. Researchers who study the development of Southern education after the Civil War often discuss how communities balanced enthusiasm for schooling with the practical need for children to help with farm work. Many families adjusted school attendance around planting and harvest seasons. You watch the final student hurry up the path toward the door before continuing along the road. The town now hums quietly with morning life. Merchants prepare their shops, wagons deliver goods, children gather for lessons, and farmers beyond the town continue guiding ploughs across sunlit fields. The peaceful night you walk through has gently transformed into a new chapter of daily activity. As sunlight spreads across the rooftops and dusty streets, the Reconstruction South continues its patient effort to rebuild through work, learning, and the steady rhythm of ordinary mornings. Morning has fully arrived now. Sunlight rests across the town like a gentle blanket, warming the rooftops, fences, and dusty roads that were silent only hours ago. You continue walking along the street while the early rhythm of daily life unfolds around you. The bakery you passed earlier now has a small line forming outside the door. A woman holds a basket in her arms while speaking quietly with another customer about the weather. Inside, the baker continues moving trays of warm bread from the oven to the cooling racks near the window. The scent of fresh loaves still fills the air. You follow the street past the schoolhouse where children's voices now drift through the open windows. Their teacher speaks clearly at the front of the room, guiding them through a reading lesson while chalk moves softly across the blackboard. The sound feels lively yet calm. Farther along the road, the town square begins filling with wagons arriving from nearby farms. Farmers guide their horses carefully toward the edges of the market area, where wooden posts allow them to tie the reins. A few merchants are already setting up tables beneath canvas awnings. Crates of vegetables appear first. Green beans, onions, and small baskets of berries freshly picked that morning. Market squares served as gathering points for trade in countless southern towns during the late 19th century. Local economic records from the 1870s frequently mention weekly markets where farmers could sell produce directly to townspeople or exchange goods with travelling merchants. You step closer to one of the tables where a farmer begins arranging apples into neat rows. The fruit shines brightly beneath the sunlight, still carrying faint traces of dew from the orchard. Nearby, another wagon arrives carrying baskets filled with eggs carefully packed in straw. A man lifts one basket and inspects the contents while discussing prices with the farmer who brought them. Bartering remains a common practice in many small communities. Instead of using only coins, people often exchange goods or settle accounts later through store credit. Business journals kept by general store owners during this period sometimes recorded entire pages of transactions where customers paid partly in cash and partly in produce or labour. You move slowly through the market square, listening to the gentle hum of conversation building around you. Voices remain friendly and relaxed. Someone laughs near a wagon loaded with pumpkins. Another person calls out a greeting to a neighbour across the square. The town feels connected through these small interactions. A pleasant detail sometimes described in travellers' diaries from the 19th century involves children receiving small treats during market visits. Merchants occasionally handed out pieces of candy or slices of fruit to young helpers who accompanied their parents into town. Such gestures helped create a welcoming atmosphere that kept families returning week after week. At the far end of the square, a man wearing a long apron begins unloading a crate filled with glass jars. He arranges them carefully on a wooden table. Inside each jar sits a bright mixture of preserved fruit: peaches, blackberries, plums floating in thick syrup. Preserving fruit became an important household skill throughout the South because fresh produce could spoil quickly in warm climates. Families often spent late summer days preparing jars that would last through winter months when fresh fruit became scarce. Recipe books printed during the late 19th century include detailed instructions for sealing jars using heated wax or metal lids. You pause to watch as a woman purchases 2 jars of peaches and wraps them carefully in cloth before placing them into her basket. The market square continues filling with people. Farm wagons line the edges of the street. Customers examine vegetables, eggs, and baskets of grain. The entire scene feels calm but purposeful. Scholars who study rural economies often point out that markets like this one played an important role in helping small communities remain self-sufficient during Reconstruction. By selling goods locally, farmers and merchants could support one another even when transportation networks remained limited. You leave the busiest part of the square and walk toward the shaded edge, where a large oak tree spreads its branches over a few wooden benches. 2 elderly men sit there quietly observing the activity. One holds a newspaper folded across his lap. The other watches wagons roll past while tapping a cane gently against the ground. Newspapers during this era travelled widely across towns and farms. Even small communities received printed pages carrying national news, political debates, and advertisements for goods arriving by rail. Circulation records from several southern states show that newspaper readership expanded steadily throughout the Reconstruction years as literacy increased and communities became more interested in regional events. You continue along the road while the sounds of the market follow behind you. Laughter, friendly bargaining, wagon wheels turning slowly across the dirt. The town now feels fully awake. Only a few hours ago, these same streets rested in deep silence beneath the stars. Now they carry the steady energy of people working, trading, and building their lives in a region still recovering from the hardships of war. And as the sun climbs higher above the rooftops, the Reconstruction South continues its patient progress through another ordinary but meaningful day. The morning market continues buzzing behind you as you walk beyond the square and follow a quieter street that leads towards the edge of town. The sun has climbed higher now, warming the dusty road beneath your boots. Shadows shorten slowly as the light spreads across the rooftops and fields. You pass several homes where the day's routines are already underway. In one yard, a woman shakes a thick blanket over a wooden railing, sending a cloud of dust drifting into the sunlight. In another yard, 2 children chase each other through the grass, while their mother hangs freshly washed clothes on a long line stretched between 2 posts. Domestic life fills the town with gentle motion. Letters written by residents during the Reconstruction decade often describe how much of the day revolved around maintaining the household. Cooking meals, washing garments, repairing clothing, and tending gardens required steady effort, especially in homes without modern conveniences. You slow your steps near a small garden patch growing beside a white wooden house. Rows of vegetables stretch neatly across the soil. Green beans climb narrow poles. Cabbage leaves spread wide and low to the ground. Tomato plants twist carefully around simple stakes hammered into the earth. Kitchen gardens like these appeared beside many homes throughout the South. Agricultural surveys compiled in the late 19th century frequently mentioned that families relied on these small plots to supplement the larger crops grown for market. The produce harvested here helped fill daily meals and reduce the need to purchase food from town stores. A woman kneels in the garden, pulling weeds from between the rows. She wipes her hands on her apron before inspecting a cluster of tomatoes that have begun to ripen beneath the sun. The work appears calm but constant. Gardens require attention nearly every day during the growing season. You continue along the road until you reach a narrow path leading toward a cluster of trees beside a creek. The sound of flowing water grows louder as you follow the trail beneath the shade of tall oaks. The creek itself moves gently across smooth stones, reflecting the bright sky above. Several women stand along the bank beside wooden tubs filled with soapy water. They are washing clothes. Each garment is scrubbed carefully against a washboard before being rinsed in the creek and wrung dry. The motion repeats again and again in a steady rhythm. Wash day was an important weekly event in many households. Period household guides printed during the 19th century even recommended specific days for laundry, so families could organise their chores more efficiently. Monday often became the preferred day for washing garments. You watch quietly from the shade while the women continue their work. One lifts a heavy shirt from the tub and twists the water from the fabric with strong hands. Another dips a bundle of cloth into the creek and shakes it gently before laying it across a rock to drain. A pleasant and somewhat amusing detail appears in a few personal diaries written during this era. Some women described friendly competitions during wash day to see who could clean the largest pile of clothes before midday. Laughter often accompanied the splashing water as neighbours compared their progress. The creek carries those sounds softly across the stones. You notice several children playing nearby at the shallow edge of the water. They skip smooth rocks across the surface while watching the ripples spread outward. One child manages a throw that bounces 4 times before sinking. He raises his arms in quiet triumph. You continue following the creek until the trees begin thinning again. The path returns you to the main road, where wagons still travel steadily between farms and town. A wagon loaded with barrels passes slowly beside you. The driver tips his hat before continuing down the road toward the market square. Barrels like those were commonly used for transporting goods throughout the 19th century. Merchants stored flour, salted meat, molasses, and even nails in sturdy wooden barrels that could be rolled easily across docks and store floors. Manufacturing records from cooper workshops during the period reveal that barrel making became a valuable trade because so many industries depended on these containers. You step aside to let the wagon pass before continuing along the road. The town now feels fully alive. Children attend lessons at the schoolhouse. Merchants welcome customers into their shops. Farmers arrive with wagons of produce to sell at the market. And along the quiet creek, washboards continue their steady rhythm against wooden tubs. Researchers studying daily life in Reconstruction communities often remark that ordinary tasks like gardening, washing, and cooking form the foundation that allowed towns to stabilise after years of upheaval. Grand political debates certainly shaped the era, yet survival often depended just as much on these simple routines repeated day after day. You walk slowly beneath the warm sunlight while the sounds of the town drift around you. The market square hums in the distance. The creek murmurs quietly behind the trees, and the steady pace of life continues, carrying this small southern town forward through another day of rebuilding. By late morning, the warmth of the sun settles more firmly across the town. The gentle coolness of early dawn has faded, replaced by the comfortable heat of a southern day beginning to stretch toward noon. You follow the road past the last row of houses and step into the open countryside where wide fields spread toward the distant tree line. The soil beneath your boots feels dry and loose. Dust lifts slightly with every step. Ahead of you, a group of farmers move slowly across a cotton field. Their figures bend and straighten in steady rhythm as they work among the rows. The plants stand waist-high now, their green leaves spreading outward beneath the bright sky. Cotton remained one of the most important crops across the South during the Reconstruction era. Agricultural production reports compiled in the 1870s consistently show cotton as the region's leading export, even as communities attempted to rebuild their farming systems after the devastation of the Civil War. You pause beside a wooden fence and watch the workers moving through the field. Some carry small sacks tied around their shoulders. Others inspect the plants, carefully checking for insects or damaged leaves. Farming requires constant attention. A man guides a mule pulling a narrow plough between the rows, loosening the soil so the plants can grow more easily. The mule walks patiently while the farmer adjusts the wooden handles of the plough behind it. The quiet creak of leather harnesses mixes with the soft scrape of metal against earth. Sharecropping had become a common farming arrangement across much of the South during these years. Under this system, landowners allowed farmers to work sections of land in exchange for a portion of the harvest. Economic records from several southern states indicate that many families relied on this arrangement because they lacked the money needed to purchase farmland of their own. You continue walking along the edge of the field until you reach a shaded spot beneath a tall pecan tree. From here, you can see several cabins scattered along the far side of the land. Thin trails of smoke drift upward from chimneys where midday meals are likely being prepared. The smell of wood smoke reaches you faintly on the warm breeze. A modest but memorable detail preserved in a few agricultural journals from the 19th century describes how farmers sometimes carried small cloth bags filled with roasted peanuts or dried fruit while working in the fields. These simple snacks helped keep their energy up during long hours under the sun. You imagine someone pausing briefly to take a handful before returning to the steady labour among the cotton rows. The sun continues rising toward its highest point in the sky. Heat begins to shimmer slightly above the field. You walk farther along the fence line where another farmer works beside a small patch of corn growing near the edge of the property. Tall green stalks sway gently in the breeze. Corn served as another essential crop for many southern farms. Government farming reports from the period frequently emphasize that corn was often grown alongside cotton because it provided a reliable food source for both families and livestock. The farmer lifts a broad hat from his head and wipes his brow before returning to the work of clearing weeds from around the corn plants. Researchers studying rural life after the Civil War often note that farmers faced constant uncertainty during Reconstruction. Weather fluctuating crop prices and the challenges of rebuilding infrastructure all influenced whether a harvest would bring profit or hardship. Standing here beside the field, you can sense how much patience and resilience these farmers must carry with them each day. The land demands attention. The crops require care. And every season brings new questions about what the harvest will bring. You leave the fence line and follow the road farther toward a small wooden bridge that crosses a narrow stream. The water moves slowly beneath the planks, reflecting the bright sky above. As you step onto the bridge, the boards creak gently beneath your weight. A wagon approaches from the opposite side carrying several large sacks piled in the back. The driver slows the horses carefully before guiding them across the bridge. Grain sacks like these often contained cornmeal or flour that would later be sold in nearby towns. Milling grain into flour remained an important part of the agricultural economy throughout the region. Mills powered by water, wheels or steam engines could be found along many rivers and streams, grinding grain brought in by local farmers. You step aside to allow the wagon to pass. The driver offers a friendly nod before continuing down the road toward town. You remain on the bridge for a moment, listening to the quiet rush of water below. The countryside stretches peacefully in every direction. Fields of cotton, rows of corn, farmhouses resting beneath tall shade trees. Despite the difficulties faced by the region during Reconstruction, daily life continues moving forward through work and persistence. Experts who study this period often reflect on how the ordinary routines of farming helped communities gradually rebuild stability after years of upheaval. The process was slow, sometimes frustrating, yet each planted seed and each harvested crop represented another small step toward the recovery. You leave the bridge behind and continue walking along the road while the sun climbs higher above the wide southern landscape. The morning has nearly reached its peak. Soon the farmers will pause briefly for their midday meals before returning to the fields once again, and the steady rhythm of rural life will continue beneath the warm sky. The sun now stands high above the countryside, and the warmth of midday settles gently across the fields and roads. You follow the dusty path back toward the town, noticing how the pace of movement has shifted slightly since the early morning. Work has not stopped, but there is a softer rhythm now, as if the entire landscape is taking a slow breath beneath the bright sky. A wagon rolls past you carrying two farmers who speak quietly while guiding their horses toward the shade of town buildings. Their shirts are damp with sweat from the morning's labour, and both men seem eager for the short rest that noon often brings. In many southern farming communities during the 1870s, the middle of the day offered a brief pause from fieldwork. Temperatures could rise quickly under the summer sun, so workers sometimes stepped away from the fields for a meal and a short period of shade before returning to their tasks in the afternoon. You step back onto the main street where several storefronts remain open but calm. The market that bustled earlier has thinned slightly. A few tables still display vegetables and jars of preserved fruit, though many farmers have already sold their goods and begun heading home. The quiet feels pleasant rather than empty. You pass the bakery again and see that only a few loaves remain on the shelf near the window. The baker leans against the doorframe while speaking with a neighbour who has stopped by to exchange the latest bits of town gossip. Conversation drifts lazily through the warm air. People discuss crops, weather, and rumours carried by travellers passing through the region. News often moves slowly across rural areas, spreading from town to town through casual conversations like this one. Newspaper circulation certainly helped share information, but word of mouth remained an important source of updates for many small communities. You continue down the street until you reach the wide shade of the large oak tree at the edge of the square. The two elderly men you noticed earlier are still seated on the bench, though now one of them has closed his newspaper and placed it neatly beside him. Both men appear half asleep in the warm afternoon air. A stray dog wanders through the square before settling beneath the bench where the ground is cool. Moments like this feel peaceful. Life moves slowly here, shaped by weatherwork and the steady passage of the sun across the sky. Across the street, a woman opens the shutters of her small boarding house to allow more air inside. Travellers passing through town often stayed in such places when local hotels were unavailable. Boarding houses played an important role in many communities during the Reconstruction period. Census documents and town directories from the late 19th century frequently list residents who operated boarding establishments that offered meals and simple lodging to merchants, labourers and visitors. You pause briefly near the doorway as the woman sweeps the porch with calm, practised movements. Inside you catch a glimpse of a long wooden table set for the midday meal. Simple plates rest beside folded cloth napkins. A pot simmers quietly on the stove in the corner. Meals served at boarding houses were usually modest but filling. Common dishes included beans, cornbread vegetables, and sometimes slices of salted meat. One charming detail mentioned in a few travel journals from this era describes how guests occasionally helped with small chores in exchange for reduced lodging fees. A visitor might chop firewood or assist with cleaning before settling in for the evening meal. The arrangement created a friendly atmosphere where travellers and residents shared stories around the dinner table. You continue walking along the street while the sun glows brightly overhead. The schoolhouse bell rings in the distance. Children soon begin spilling out the doorway, laughing and stretching their arms after the morning lessons. Some hurry toward home while others gather beneath the shade trees near the road to continue their games. Education in the Reconstruction South expanded gradually during this period. School systems were still developing and attendance often depended on family responsibilities or seasonal farm work. Researchers studying education after the Civil War often note that communities faced difficult choices about balancing classroom learning with the practical needs of rural life. You watch as a group of children chase one another across the grass near the schoolyard. Their laughter echoes across the quiet street. For a moment the town feels almost timeless. Work continues in the fields. Merchants wait for afternoon customers. Travellers rest inside boarding houses. And children enjoy a few free hours before evening chores begin. You step beyond the schoolyard and follow the road toward the outskirts of town once more. The countryside stretches wide and bright beneath the afternoon sun. Farmers who pause for their midday meals are beginning to return to the fields, guiding their mules back into the rows of cotton and corn. Life resumes its steady rhythm. Scholars who examine everyday routines during Reconstruction often emphasize how ordinary moments like these helped communities recover from the disruptions of war. Stability did not arrive suddenly. Instead, it grew gradually through repeated patterns of work, rest, and cooperation among neighbours. Standing here beneath the warm sky, you can almost feel that quiet persistence. The town behind you hums softly with activity. The fields ahead wait patiently for the afternoon's labour, and the long southern day continues unfolding at its unhurried pace. The afternoon sun drifts slowly across the sky, and the warmth settles deeper into the roads and rooftops of the town behind you. You walk farther along the dusty path that winds between fields and scattered farmhouses, noticing how the countryside feels quieter now than it did during the lively hours of the morning market. The air hums gently with insects moving through the tall grass. Somewhere nearby, a cicada begins its steady buzzing song, a sound that seems to rise and fall with the heat of the afternoon. You pass a small farmhouse where the front door stands open to allow a breeze through the rooms. A rocking chair moves slowly on the porch as an older woman sits fanning herself with a folded piece of paper. Afternoons in rural communities often brought a brief lull in activity. Field work continued, of course, but many people slowed their pace during the hottest hours of the day. Personal letters written by residents in the late 19th century sometimes mention how families planned chores around the sun, choosing early mornings and late afternoons for the heaviest labour. You nod politely as you pass the porch. The woman smiles and lifts her fan in greeting before returning to her quiet rest in the shade. A little farther along the road, you notice a group of men gathered beside a wooden shed near the edge of a field. They stand around a wagon wheel that has been removed from its axle. One man kneels beside it holding a hammer, while another steadies the rim. Repair work like this was a normal part of farm life during the era. Wagons travelled constantly between fields, towns and markets, and the rough dirt roads often caused wheels to loosen or crack. Craftsmen, known as wheelwrights, specialised in building and repairing wagon wheels, though farmers frequently handled smaller repairs themselves using basic tools. The man with the hammer taps carefully against the metal band wrapped around the wooden wheel. The sound rings out sharply before fading into the warm afternoon air. You pause nearby to watch the repair. The men speak quietly with one another, occasionally wiping sweat from their foreheads before continuing their work. A small but delightful detail appears in a few memoirs written by people who grew up in rural towns during this period. Children sometimes collected loose wagon nails that fell along busy roads and kept them as tiny treasures in pockets or wooden boxes. To a child, even a bent nail from a passing wagon could feel like an exciting discovery. You smile at the thought while continuing along the road. The path curves gently toward a line of trees where the land slopes downward into a wide pasture. Several cows graze peacefully among the tall grass, lifting their heads only occasionally as a breeze moves through the field. Livestock farming formed an important part of the southern rural economy during Reconstruction. Census records and agricultural surveys from the 1870s show that many farms kept cattle, pigs or chickens alongside their crop fields. These animals provided meat, milk, eggs, and sometimes additional income when sold at local markets. You lean against the fence for a moment while watching the cows wander slowly across the pasture. One calf trots clumsily behind its mother before stopping to nibble at the grass. The quiet scene feels almost dreamlike beneath the wide sky. Researchers who examine agricultural recovery after the Civil War often discuss how farmers balance crop production with livestock care. Some historians suggest that raising animals helped families maintain a more stable food supply during years when cotton prices fluctuated unpredictably. Others believe the practice had always been common and simply continued despite the region's economic struggles. Either way, the animals grazing peacefully before you play a small but meaningful role in the daily life of the farm. You leave the fence and continue down to the road where the trees begin to thicken into a shaded lane. The air grows cooler beneath the branches and the sound of insects softens slightly. A young boy rides past you on horseback, guiding the animal carefully while carrying a small bundle tied behind the saddle. Perhaps he is delivering supplies or a message to a nearby farm. Travel between neighbouring homes often relied on horseback or wagons, especially in areas where railroads had not yet extended their lines. You follow the shaded lane until the road rises slightly toward a hill that overlooks the countryside. From this vantage point, you can see fields stretching in several directions. Cotton rows form pale green patterns across the land. Cornfields sway gently in the breeze. Scattered farmhouses rest beneath tall oak and pecan trees. The entire landscape appears peaceful beneath the afternoon sun. Scholars who study Reconstruction sometimes focus on the political conflicts and economic struggles that shaped the era. Yet everyday life for many families unfolded in scenes very much like this one, where the land, the weather, and the steady rhythm of work guided each passing day. You stand quietly on the hill while the warm wind moves across the fields. Behind you, the town continues its slow afternoon routines. Ahead of you, the farms stretch toward the distant tree line, and the long southern day carries on calm and unhurried beneath the wide open sky. The afternoon continues drifting gently toward evening as you leave the hill behind and follow the road back toward town. The sunlight has begun to soften slightly, losing the sharp brightness of midday and taking on a warmer glow that settles across the fields and rooftops. A light breeze moves through the tall grass along the roadside, carrying with it the faint scent of soil and distant wood smoke. You notice that some farmers are finishing their work for the day. In a cotton field nearby, a small group gathers sacks that were filled during the afternoon. One man lifts a heavy bundle onto the back of a wagon, while another tightens the ropes that hold the load in place. The mule harnessed to the wagon flicks its ears patiently while waiting for the journey back to the farmhouse. Cotton harvesting during the 19th century required long hours of careful work. Agricultural accounts written during the Reconstruction years describe how labourers moved steadily through the fields, picking the fluffy white fibres by hand and storing them in cloth sacks before transporting the harvest to storage sheds or nearby markets. You walk slowly along the fence line while the wagon creaks forward onto the road. Dust rises behind the wheels as the mule begins its steady pace toward home. Farther ahead, the road bends gently toward a cluster of buildings where another familiar sound reaches your ears. Metal striking metal. You follow the noise until you reach a small workshop with wide doors standing open to the afternoon air. Inside, a blacksmith works beside a glowing forge. The orange light flickers against the walls as he lifts a heated piece of iron with long tongs and places it carefully on the anvil. With a firm grip on his hammer, he begins shaping the metal through a series of steady blows. Clang, clang, clang. The ringing echoes out across the quiet road. Blacksmith shops formed an essential part of town life during this period. Farmers relied on blacksmiths to repair tools, shape horseshoes, and create the iron fittings needed for wagons and farming equipment. Trade directories from the late 19th century frequently list blacksmiths among the most important craftsmen serving rural communities. You lean against the doorway for a moment while watching the work unfold. The blacksmith pauses briefly to plunge the hot metal into a bucket of water. A cloud of steam rises with a sharp hiss before fading into the warm air. One charming detail preserved in several small town recollections describes how children often gathered outside blacksmith shops to watch sparks fly from the anvil. The bright flashes of light were both exciting and slightly mysterious to young observers. Some blacksmiths even allowed curious children to pump the large bellows that fed air into the forge. The memory must have felt magical to those who experienced it. You continue along the road as the rhythmic hammering fades behind you. The town ahead now feels busier again as people return from their day's work. A wagon loaded with firewood rolls slowly down the street, while two boys walk beside it carrying smaller bundles in their arms. Evening preparations have begun. Cooking fires will soon be lit in kitchens across the town. Wood will be stacked beside stoves and hearths in readiness for the meal to come. Domestic routines like these form the quiet backbone of daily life throughout the region. Household guides printed during the 19th century often included long sections describing how families should organise cooking, cleaning and evening tasks to maintain an orderly home. You pass a small church standing at the corner of a narrow lane. The white wooden building rests peacefully beneath a tall pine tree, its simple steeple reaching towards the softening sky. Churches played an important role in many southern communities during Reconstruction. Congregations often served not only as places of worship, but also as gathering spaces where neighbours discussed news, organised events, and supported one another during difficult times. Records kept by local churches from the era sometimes mention meetings held to raise funds for schools, assist struggling families, or repair buildings damaged during the war. You pause briefly near the gate and listen to the quiet wind moving through the branches above. The town feels calm again, almost reflective. Researchers who explore the social life of Reconstruction communities often point out that institutions like churches helped create a sense of stability after years of upheaval. Through regular gatherings and shared traditions, people slowly rebuilt the connections that held their communities together. You continue walking along the road while the sun sinks lower toward the distant trees. The golden light now spreads across the rooftops and dusty streets. Shadows grow longer. Farm wagons return home. Blacksmith hammers grow silent, and the entire town begins preparing for the gentle arrival of evening. The golden light of late afternoon stretches gently across the town as you walk farther down the quiet street. The sun now hangs lower in the sky, casting long shadows that reach across fences, wagon ruts, and wooden porches. The air feels cooler than it did earlier, and the steady hum of insects softens as the heat of the day slowly fades. You pass the small church again, where the pine branches whisper softly above the roof. A few people stand near the steps, speaking in low voices before parting ways for the evening. Their conversation drifts lightly through the air, filled with the ordinary concerns of crops, family visits, and the promise of tomorrow's work. Farther along the road, several wagons return from the countryside. Their wheels roll slowly through the dusty street, while the horses move at an easy practice pace. The town is gently gathering itself for night. Smoke begins rising from chimneys as families prepare their evening meals. The smell of wood fires mixes with the scent of cooking vegetables and warm bread drifting from open windows. You pause beside a small house where laughter spills through the doorway. Inside, a family gathers around a wooden table while plates are placed carefully in front of each seat. A pot rests near the centre, steam curling upward as someone lifts the lid to stir the contents. Meals like this formed the centre of daily family life across the Reconstruction South. Household manuals printed during the late 19th century often described supper as the moment when families reunited after a full day of work in field shops or kitchens. It was a time not only for eating, but for conversation and shared rest. You continue walking down the road while the evening deepens around you. Children who were playing earlier now return toward their homes, their footsteps slowing as the sky begins turning shades of soft orange and pink above the rooftops. A small detail preserved in family recollections from the period describes how some parents used the sound of church bells or the setting sun as the signal that children must return indoors. The rule was simple. When the light faded enough that you could barely see the road, playtime ended. You smile quietly at the thought while watching two boys race each other toward a farmhouse gate before disappearing inside. The town settles gradually. The blacksmith shop stands silent now, its forge cooled after a day of ringing hammers. The market square where farmers gathered earlier appears calm again, with only a few crates remaining stacked beside the general store. The rocking chair near the porch moves slowly in the evening breeze. Town account books from the late 19th century reveal that small businesses often closed earlier than modern shops. Without electric lighting, merchants depended on daylight to conduct their work. So many storefronts shut their doors shortly after sunset. You notice one shopkeeper lowering wooden shutters across his windows, while another sweeps the porch before stepping inside. The quiet routine feels almost ceremonial. Day has finished its work. Night will soon take its place. You walk toward the edge of town, where the fields begin again beyond the final row of houses. The sky above the countryside glows with warm colour, and the distant tree line forms a dark silhouette against the fading light. Farmers continue returning home along the road. One wagon carries bundles of firewood, while another holds sacks of harvested crops gathered earlier in the day. Livestock wander slowly toward their barns, where they will spend the night. Agricultural records from the Reconstruction decade often emphasize how closely daily schedules followed the movement of sunlight. Work began with the dawn and ended when darkness made further labour difficult. Standing here at the edge of town, you can almost feel that ancient rhythm guiding the entire landscape. A gentle wind moves across the fields, stirring the tall grasses and carrying the faint sound of crickets beginning their evening chorus. Researchers studying rural communities of the era frequently observe that evenings offered one of the few moments when families could truly pause from the demands of work. After supper, many people gathered on porches or around fireplaces to talk quietly, repair tools, or simply rest. These calm hours help restore energy for the following day. You turn back towards the town while the final light of the sun fades slowly from the horizon. Lanterns begin glowing inside several windows. A horse nickers softly from a nearby barn, and the peaceful southern evening spreads across the streets and fields like a slow, gentle curtain drawing closed on another day. Evening settles more deeply over the town as you continue walking along the quiet street. The warm glow of sunset fades into softer shades of purple and blue, and the first faint stars begin appearing above the rooftops. The air now feels cooler, carrying the gentle scent of wood smoke and night flowers drifting from gardens beside the houses. Lanterns flicker to life inside windows one by one. The soft yellow light spills onto porches and across the dusty road, creating small islands of brightness surrounded by growing shadows. You pass a house where a family sits together on the front steps after supper. Their voices remain calm and unhurried while they talk about the day that has just ended. A man leans back in a wooden chair while slowly rocking it against the porch boards. Beside him, a woman mends a shirt by the glow of a lantern resting on a small table. Evening chores often included quiet tasks like sewing tool repair or preparing supplies for the following morning. Surviving household journals from the late 19th century frequently describe these moments when families used the last hours of daylight to maintain clothing and equipment that would soon be needed again. You continue down the road where the general store now stands closed. The wide porch where customers gathered earlier in the day sits empty, except for the familiar rocking chair resting near the door. The building feels peaceful now. A faint creak rises as the chair shifts slightly in the night breeze. Store ledgers preserved from many southern towns reveal that merchants kept careful records of every purchase made by their customers. These books sometimes contained long lists of items bought on credit, with families paying their balances later after harvest season brought new income. Such arrangements helped small communities continue trading even when money was scarce. You pause briefly at the edge of the square and look toward the church again. A soft glow shines through the windows where a small gathering has begun inside. The door stands open and gentle singing drifts out across the quiet street. Evening hymn gatherings were common in many towns during this era. Congregations often met not only on Sundays, but also on certain weeknights to sing together, pray, or discuss community concerns. Church records from Reconstruction communities sometimes note these gatherings as important social moments where neighbours strengthened the bonds that held their towns together. You walk slowly past the churchyard while the music continues softly behind you. One curious detail appears in a few local recollections written decades later. Some people remembered how certain singers in small congregations became well known for their powerful voices, even though they never performed beyond their own towns. Neighbours might speak proudly of a particular singer whose voice filled the church so strongly that it seemed to echo out across the fields. You smile quietly at the thought while following the road toward the edge of town. The countryside beyond lies dark and peaceful now. Fireflies begin drifting through the tall grass, their tiny lights blinking on and off like distant lanterns. You stop near a wooden fence and rest your arms along the top rail. The fields stretch outward beneath the rising moon. Somewhere far away, a dog barks once before falling silent again. Historians who study everyday life in the Reconstruction South often emphasise how evenings allowed people to reconnect with family and neighbours after long hours of labour. While the political struggles of the era filled newspapers and speeches, the private moments shared on porches and in quiet homes form the deeper fabric of community life. Standing here in the cool night air, you can sense how valuable these peaceful hours must have been. Behind you, the town grows calmer with every passing minute. Doors close gently, lanterns dim. The voices that once filled the streets fade into the quiet comfort of homes. You leave the fence and begin walking back toward the centre of town. The sky above has grown darker now, filled with a wide scattering of stars. The same constellations that guided travellers and farmers for generations shine steadily overhead. One pleasant custom, remembered in several old town stories, involved neighbours gathering outdoors on warm evenings simply to watch the stars together. Without electric lights, the night sky appeared bright and endless, encouraging quiet conversation beneath the open air. Such moments required nothing more than a wooden chair and a little patience. You glance upward as the moon climbs higher above the rooftops. The town rests peacefully beneath its silver light. Another day in the Reconstruction South has come to a gentle close. Yet the rhythms of life will begin again soon with the first pale glow of morning. Night has now settled completely over the town, wrapping the streets and fields in a calm blanket of darkness. The last voices fade from porches, and most of the lanterns that glowed in windows earlier have been dimmed or extinguished. Only a few lights remain flickering softly in homes where families finish quiet conversations before sleep. You walk slowly along the familiar road that carried you through so many moments of this long day. The air feels cooler now, and the sky above stretches wide and clear. Stars fill the darkness with gentle brightness, while the moon rests just above the distant tree line. Crickets sing steadily in the grass. Somewhere nearby, an owl calls once from the branches of a tall oak. The town seems to breathe slowly beneath the quiet night. You pass the general store again. The wooden porch where people gathered earlier stands silent, and the rocking chair beside the door has come to rest at last. Dust from the busy market day still lies faintly across the road, though the wagon tracks are now softened by the evening breeze. Many small towns across the south followed rhythms like this during the Reconstruction years. Life moved according to daylight weather and the demands of work. Without electric lighting or modern transportation, communities naturally slowed after sunset, allowing the night to become a time of rest and reflection. You continue walking toward the edge of town where the houses begin to thin and the open countryside returns. One window still glows softly behind a curtain. Inside, someone moves quietly across the room before lowering the lantern flame. Darkness returns. Farm fields stretch peacefully beneath the moonlight beyond the last fence. Cotton rows appear as pale lines across the ground, while the tops of corn plants sway gently in the night breeze. Agricultural life shaped nearly every aspect of the region during this period. Farming remained the central occupation for millions of people throughout the South during the 1870s, influencing everything from daily schedules to local economies. The land determined when work began, when meals were eaten, and when the town itself slowly drifted towards sleep. You stop beside the same wooden fence where you stood earlier in the evening. The pasture beyond lies quiet now. The cows that wandered there during the afternoon have settled for the night, their shapes barely visible in the moonlit grass. A faint rustling moves through the trees as the wind shifts gently. Researchers who examine the Reconstruction era often discuss the political struggles and economic hardships that shaped these years. Yet they also recognised that ordinary people continued building their lives through steady routines of work, family and cooperation. Recovery did not arrive quickly. Instead, it unfolded gradually through thousands of quiet days, like the one you have just walked through. From early morning chores and bustling markets to peaceful evenings beneath lantern light, each moment formed part of a larger effort to rebuild communities across the south. You turn slowly back toward the town. The streets remain silent now. Most doors are closed. Most windows are dark. Even the church that echoed with singing earlier stands still beneath the stars. One small and charming memory recorded in an old town memoir tells of children who sometimes tried to count the stars before falling asleep on warm nights. They rarely succeeded, of course. The sky always seemed to hold more lights than anyone could finish counting. Still, the effort often lulled them gently toward dreams. You glance upward now, seeing that same endless sky stretching across the quiet countryside. The stars shimmer softly above rooftops, fields, and distant trees. The town rests. The farms rest. And the long story of this day slowly fades into peaceful silence. Now the pace of your journey begins to slow. The sounds around you soften. Your footsteps grow lighter as the night deepens, and the world seems to drift into a gentler rhythm. You take one final look across the landscape you have wandered through since dawn. The schoolhouse where children learn their lessons. The market square filled with wagons and friendly bargaining. The quiet farms where cotton and corn grew beneath the sun. The church where neighbours gathered in song. Each place played a small role in the steady rebuilding of life after the turmoil of war. The people who lived here faced uncertainty, hard work, and many difficult years. Yet they also shared meals, helped neighbours raise children, and created communities that slowly regained their strength. The story of Reconstruction is often told through politics and conflict, but beneath those larger events lived millions of ordinary moments. Moments of work, moments of laughter, moments of quiet evening rest beneath a sky full of stars. And tonight, as the town sleeps peacefully around you, those moments feel gentle and steady. The road grows darker ahead. The night air cools softly against your skin. Your journey through this small southern town comes to a quiet close. Now the story itself begins to settle, just like the town you have been wandering through. The sounds fade. The wind softens, and the calm rhythm of night invites you to rest as well. Let your thoughts drift slowly like the evening breeze across the fields. Let the images of lantern light and quiet roads grow softer with every passing moment. The town sleeps. The stars shine quietly above. And somewhere in the distance, the slow heartbeat of history continues its steady rhythm beneath the peaceful southern sky. Sleep comes easily here, and the story gently fades with the night. Now the pace softens even more. The night feels deeper, calmer, almost weightless. Imagine the town resting completely beneath the quiet sky. The homes are still. The fields lie motionless under the moon. Even the wind seems to move more slowly, brushing the tops of the trees in soft whispers. Your long walk has come to its end. From the first glow of dawn to the peaceful hush of night, you have wandered through a single day in the Reconstruction South. You have seen farmers begin their work in the cool morning air. You have heard the voices of merchants and travellers in the market square. You have watched children run across dusty roads and families gather around supper tables. Now all of those moments drift gently into memory. Picture the last lantern being dimmed inside a quiet farmhouse. A door closes softly. Footsteps fade across wooden floors. Outside, the night sky stretches endlessly above fields and trees that rest after a long day. The stars shimmer with calm, steady light. Somewhere in the distance, crickets continue their gentle chorus, a soothing rhythm that blends perfectly with the slow breathing of the countryside. There is nothing more to do tonight. No wagons moving, no markets bustling, no voices calling across the square, only the peaceful stillness that arrives when the day finally releases its last energy. Allow that stillness to settle around you. Imagine lying down beneath a soft blanket, while the cool night air drifts through an open window. The sounds of the countryside remain distant and comforting. Your thoughts slow. Your breathing becomes calm. The town you visited today rests quietly behind you. Its people asleep, its streets empty, its stories continuing silently into tomorrow. And as the night deepens beneath the wide southern sky, the journey fades gently into sleep. Sweet dreams.